Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the District of Squamish Council for Tuesday, July 16th. Apsqualon, please Squamish, Wayomail. We meet tonight on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. We have an amended agenda in front of us, Council. There's a few things I want to draw to your attention. The delegation of item 3 has asked to be removed from the agenda. Under bylaws, section 8, first and second reading for item 1 and for item 2, the date change for the public hearing has gone to September 3rd versus September 10th. And also we've struck out setting the date for one of the second reading of the Wilson Crescent piece. And then under section D, first 3 readings, there's amended attachments in your blues for the notice enforcement bylaw and the municipal ticket information bylaw. Just adding an administrative piece. There was a table missing that we were adding, so that references the bylaw. And then in your blues, you also have a list of letters received on the camping bylaw, and they'll be contemplated under receipt of correspondence. Okay, so that's the amended agenda. Would someone like to move that? Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any no's to motion, Council? Seeing none. We have delegations and proclamations. So first up, a request for grant in kind for Squamish Pride is Tabitha McIntyre. Come forward. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. For a start, my accent can be a little bit difficult, so if you have any problems, I can get a translator. We are here to represent Pride Squamish, and this is our first year. As Pride Squamish, we would like to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Squamish people, Squamish Nation. So with Safe and Sound slowly tying down, there was a need for a queer-focused organisation, so Pride Squamish was born. We're a newly formed not-for-profit. We're organised by a collective of volunteers, and we're committed to creating spaces and events which support queer, LGBTQ2+ history, culture, community and love. We want to create a space where people can learn, people can develop respect, collaboration and equality. So we are holding an event on the 15th of September, which will be starting with a march from the top of the downtown down to Junction Park. The march will be opened by queer members or queer identifying members of the Squamish Nation, and it will be led by members of the diversity clubs and local schools, all the young people. This march is to commemorate the 50th year of Stonewall, and then we're going to go down to Junction Park where we have local entertainment, local food vendors, local sales. We have a market, and we have a really big community area, so we have contributions from the local library, we have contributions from sexual health clinics, from other LGBT focused organisations. So I'd like to take a point to identify that Pride Squamish isn't just one day, it's not just one event. We're creating a ripple in the community. We want to create a safe and supportive community for all. And the reason we're here today is to ask if Council would graciously allow us to have the land, would grant us the land and grant us the cost of the event licence. So I believe the event licence is $50, I believe the land would come to $400-ish. In addition to that, we hadn't written this in, but we would also like to invite the district to raise a rainbow flag over the municipal halls here for the day. We can provide the flag, but we would love it if you would take part and raise the flag on our behalf. That's all we have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any questions for a delegation? Councillor Race?
Thank you. Just to clarify the amount, The material in front of me is it's $1,400 rental plus a permit fee. Did you say 1,400 or 400?
It should be $400 for the land and then $50 for the event license.
Oh, okay. And that's not what's in front of us, actually.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So that's fine. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't mind when things are less expensive.
Doesn't mean you can change it now.
Anyone, any other questions? Councillor Pengill.
When we're waiving fees, does that then come out of our contingency and go to the department that's, or how does that work from a budgeting perspective?
That's correct.
Yes, it comes from council contingency. Councillor Craig. No, Councillor Herford.
Yeah, thank you. I really like this initiative. Like Councillor Race, there was a larger number on some paperwork that we saw earlier, and I was wrestling with it because I really liked the initiative, but it was a bit more than I was really excited about, but I wanted to make it happen, and now we're at a number that's, yes, that seems really easy for me. So I like to move that we do this, including the flag. So I don't know how we'd like to word that. So
Yeah, I think
so support from council contingency and including the rate. Is it for like? Would you think? What sort of time frame would be appropriate for the flag for your event, for like a couple days a week before as promo for the big day?
That would be really exciting because throughout the week before Pride Squamish happens, we have events happening throughout town. So we have places like Backcountry and A-Frame all putting on Pride Squamish events which are fundraisers, so there will be like a buzz around the town. So it would be really cool to have it the week before, leading into.
I'm looking at the date here so I can get the wording of this correctly. So from the put the flag up on the 9th to the 16th in celebration of Squamish Pride.
Okay. So seconded by Councillor French. Any other comments?
I'll be supporting this. I was, before you explained that you're sort of a new group, I guess I had misunderstood the relationship to Safe and Sound. Although I like the event, I was hesitant because I am trying to stick to our community enhancement grants in that process. So understanding that you are new, I'm happy to support this. I hope that you can talk to staff briefly and understand our community enhanced grant process for years going forward. But otherwise, I think this is great.
Councillor Stoner?
Really excited to see you guys come forward and to start filling the gap that unfortunately was going to be there with Safe and Sound winding down. So it's really great to see some other folks stepping up and into that place. I'm very happy to support this. I think this is exactly why we have council contingency, is to support things like this that come forward mid-year. So I'm more than happy to do that.
Councillor Herford?
Just echo my fellow councilor's sentiment. This is a great initiative, and thank you for stepping up. I know this isn't the easiest chamber sometimes to come into and present to. With not everyone's into public speaking. You did awesome, and it's a great cause and an important event. So I look forward to checking it out in September. I'm happy to support. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for coming tonight. One of the priorities in our strategic plan, which is over here, is connect citizens through facilities, programs, and gathering spaces to create community. And I think that is exactly what you are going to do and what you'll be all about. And we do need to create a community that is for everybody. So I applaud your initiative and really glad that this is going forward. So I'll call the question, council. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And your grant application will be due soon for next year. So don't miss out. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a delegation for a request of letter of support for childcare space. Madeleine Cott. Oh, you got the trendy fashion accessory that all of our staff wear. Welcome, Madeleine. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm here for hopefully a letter of support for a grant that I'm applying for a childcare facility. My partner Kurt and I just recently purchased a home in Brackendale, and there's this really beautiful large outbuilding in the backyard that we're going to be renovating to create a childcare facility for 16 kids, 30 months to school age. Previous to this, I worked in Ontario for numerous years developing and creating a junior kindergarten program. And when I moved out here, I quickly realized that that is not something that the school systems offer here. So for the past year, I've been commuting to Collingwood and teaching there. But as I got immersed in the community and talked to families and friends, it became quite clear that there's a need for childcare, and I can use my education to help some families in Squamish, so I thought that this was the time to do it. So I'll be applying for a grant from the BC government, and it's a startup grant, and it's basically just there to help out with the initial fees that you have to rebuild and repurpose the existing structure.
Council, any questions? Who wants to put this motion forward? Yeah, Council Riggs.
This will be a private business?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be incorporating, but I will have staff with me. Obviously, for 16 kids, you need at least 2 staff members, but I hope to have 3. So I've already kind of started that process and looking around.
Are you concerned about the assistance to business? I think that Robin, do you want to speak to this?
Certainly. Robin Arthur, General Manager, Corporate Services. The letter that we would be providing wouldn't say that we support your business specifically. It would be something more high level that says District of Squamish, or Squamish is suffering from a daycare shortage crisis and this kind of thing, and we encourage business development in that area type of a thing. So it wouldn't say you.
Yeah.
Support you. It would be a little bit more.
It would be more general.
Yeah.
We are desperate for more childcare. Councilor Herbert?
Thank you. I'm generally supportive. I'm just curious about zoning land use for the space. And given that the letter that we're going to provide is quite vague, I just wonder where you're at in that process as far as licensing. Is that something that, I don't know, the zoning of your spot and how that...
I've actually been talking to both building and planning, and they've been amazing. And so it's zoned for up to 16 kids. That's just recently changed from 8 to 16. And I've also been in touch with Heather Nash, who is the licensing officer, and she's seen the plans and everything is okay to go.
Councilor French?
I'll move that we write a letter.
Seconded by Councilor Race. Any comments? All right, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Because we need daycare. Good luck.
Thank you.
Next up is proclamation request for Wrongful Conviction Day that Council proclaim October 2nd, 2019, Wrongful Conviction Day in the District of Squamish. Not seeing a hand. Council, does no one want to move that motion? Okay.
Can I move it?
Can you move a different motion? Sure.
On the topic of proclamations, I would like to move that during the next annual review of our procedures bylaw, we consider including guidelines or requirements with respect to proclamations for the district. And if that gets discussed.
Seconded by Councilor French.
Yeah, so I think that it's one thing that I've noticed sitting here for the last few months that we get a number of requests to move for proclamations, and although some of them are definitely well warranted, this one in particular, I think wrongful convictions are a bad thing. But in terms, I think we need to consider what impact we can have as Squamish Council and as a district in actually moving those proclamations. So I think it'd be helpful that we have some guidelines around what we consider for proclamations.
Okay. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And last up, proclamation request for Rails Safety Week that Council proclaims September 23rd to 29th, Rails Safety Week in the District of Squamish. Councilor Anderson, you'll move that. Seconded by Councilor Race. Any comments?
Squamish is a railway town and always has been since its beginnings as modern Squamish. And we have a number of safety issues that are ongoing all the time, and we do seek to cultivate good relations with our railway companies, BCR, CN, BCR Properties, And so I'm keen to support this resolution just to remind us that this is an ongoing issue, and we have various times during the year correspondence and issues come forward regarding grass safety in District of Squamish.
Thank you. Councilor Bird.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to support this. As we go through and look at safe routes to school, I'm becoming acutely aware of the proximity of CN tracks to a high percentage of the schools in town, and I think this is an important piece of just keeping everybody safe. So hopefully this comes with some other initiative during that week. But
Thank you. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any consideration of unscheduled public attendance? So this would be anyone who feels like they need to speak before the next regular business meeting. So come forward and basically you have 2 minutes to make your case for why you need to be heard tonight, and then there's a vote of council whether to allow that to take place or not. So it's not about advocating for what you're here to talk about, it's sort of justifying why we need to hear it tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. There's going to be the discussion on readings 2 and 3 and some results of motions that happened regarding the camping bylaw tonight. I'm representing the Vico residents of Squamish, and we will probably have some important positional commentary on the resulting outcomes. With the summer recess coming up, I think it's important to have some of those noted as soon as possible.
Okay. Council, some motion, correct? Someone would need to move that we hear Mr. Rufio, what's your last name? West. Mr. West.
And then at what item?
And then at what juncture?
At
would
what
we hear it?
juncture?
Obviously, for Mr. West, he would want to be heard before we speak to the camping bylaw. But we also have some timed events, so it would be after the timed events and before the camping bylaw, if council wanted to hear that. Councilor Pettengill.
I'll move that.
Moved by Councilor Pettengill,
also,
seconded by Councilor Herford. Any discussion? You look like you wanted to say something, Councilor Ray.
Yeah, and this is a zoning issue. And what we have before us tonight, I think, is first and second or second and third? Oh, second and third, I beg your pardon. Withdraw the comment.
Okay. No other comments? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So, Mr. West, we'll put you on the agenda just before item 8. Nope, sorry. Just before item 8D, which is just before first 3 readings.
I see.
Oh yeah, there you go. That's the notice of enforcement bylaw. It's the bold lettering, Sarah.
Sorry.
Okay, just before 8C. Thank you. Sorry for my confusion. Okay, with that, we have a few timed items. So first up, development permit number 500-37781 Cleveland Avenue. And this is a development permit with variance. So there is opportunity for the proponent and members of the public to speak. However, I'll go to staff first for their presentation. Over to you.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Carrie Hamilton. I'm a planner with the Community Planning and Infrastructure Department, and I'm presenting to you today development permit 500 located at 37781 Cleveland Avenue. This development project was first introduced to the previous council on April 3rd, 2018, under Amendment Bylaw 2565-2017. It was the second MUD 2 rezoning for the downtown South area. The MUD 2 rezoning was later adopted on October 16th of that same year and included a land development agreement, abbreviated to LDA for short. The LDA secured additional roadworks and services, 20% market rental housing for 1 unit, and the estimated community amenity contribution. Before council this evening is the development permit application for this rezoning project. The development is proposing a different mix of employment in residential gross floor area and requires an amendment to the LDA in order to be considered for approval. This amendment includes replacing the 1 unit market rental with 222 meters squared of employment space. This amendment will be further detailed in subsequent slides for you this evening. So the subject lands are located at 37781 Cleveland Avenue. The lot is surrounded by general industrial I3 zone lots to the north and south, and light industrial I1 zone lots to the east and west. The property is zoned creative mixed-use district MUD 2, and the proposed development is subject to Development Permit Area Guidelines 3, which is universal guidelines, and Development Permit Area Guidelines 7 for Downtown South. The applicable Development Permit Area Guidelines are found in Schedule A of your report. So given this is the first time this council has seen a MUD 2 development, I'd like to use a series of diagrams to describe this development as it pertains to MUD 2 zoning, the Development Permit Guidelines, and the official community plan. So the MUD 2 zoning density calculation is driven by 2 factors, lot coverage and height. MUD 2 allows for 60% lot coverage, which generally would allow for street-facing development and ground floor parking at the rear. The standard allowable development is 3 stories in height, with a minimum of 50% employment space. This base requirement of 50% was designed to honor Downtown South's industrial roots by ensuring a higher percentage of employment space is preserved during redevelopment. The zone also includes height exemptions for rooftop patios, features such as railings, elevator, penthouse, and staircases. So the zone allows for a number of density bonus to provide development flexibility and incentivize needs in the area. Some of the bonuses include 20% market rental in order to achieve an increase of residential from 50% to 70%, increased building height when 20% of the lot is preserved for a ground floor courtyard area to support street level activation, and lastly, to support more light industrial and artisan uses in the area, a height bonus is available when 75% of the ground floor has 5-meter ceiling heights. This area allows for 40% mezzanine, however, does not require it. In this particular development, no mezzanine is provided. So to break up the massing of this development and to respond to development permit guidelines of street activation OCP policy of employment diversity, the architect has reduced the size of the front building and created a separate rear building, offering more opportunity for second-story employment space. As you can see from the diagram, the applicants are proposing to provide 55% employment space, all highlighted in red, in line with the MUD 2 base requirement and mixed-use employment land use for this area. The development proposed uses have differed from what was originally proposed at rezoning. At rezoning, the development had proposed to also use the residential density bonus to achieve 66% residential. This bonus required them to secure one of the proposed 5 residential units as market rental. This density bonus and requirement are written into the MUD 2 zone itself and were not a condition of rezoning or considered as a community amenity contribution at the time of rezoning. As the intention of this MUD 2 zone was to offer variety and flexibility as well as to support employment space in the mixed-use development, staff are supportive of this shift in use. So to further reduce building massing, the ground floor commercial space is uniquely designed for the 5-meter high covered walkway through the front building. It's called the Market Alley, and provides access to the fronting ground floor employment space, the residential lobby, and the rear employment space. It will also provide informal access from Cleveland through to the laneway. It is detailed from a board-formed concrete storytelling wall along the north end, meeting development permit guidelines of public art. A second form of reduced massing is the addition of a balcony light wells. The lemon grove splash color and break in the massing is compliant with both zoning bylaw and development permit guidelines. These balcony wells are designed to be enclosed and, despite the loss of views, would still allow for natural light and air circulation, as the balconies are dripped through bar grate deck. The bar grate decks are removable and not a part of the building structure, so in the event that balconies are enclosed, they could be removed if the intention or use of the space is not being upheld. The light wells offer an opportunity for this development to create more natural light space within the units, which in this development, their bathrooms can have natural light, and den space can be a 3rd bedroom to offer flexibility and affordability. Light wells are being used more frequently in cities to either address smaller unit needs and or affordability of units. The benefits of these light wells can also be passed on to the adjacent developer, as they too can benefit from natural light adjacent to these light wells, if they so choose. Staff have prepared a slide of some of these light well examples, should council wish to see them after this presentation. The development is proposing to meet step 4 for its residential units in the BC Building Code. As this is a larger mixed-use development and not just a residential development, step 4 is the highest step for this form of building. The development is also aiming to achieve net zero as part of the Clean BC Better Building Challenge. Net zero means that the building's energy needs and consumption are designed within and coming from the building itself, while step 4 means that a building is built to a standard that reduces its energy consumption or enhances its air tightness. They are two different energy efficiency building measures, so clarity, net zero does not imply that a building is step 4. To meet net zero, the development needs a certain amount of rooftop square footage for the installation of photovoltaic panels, which are panels that capture solar energy. As you can see from the diagram below, the MUD2 zone already allows for some rooftop exemptions in orange. However, the allowable amount of rooftop for the elevator, penthouse, and staircase would not be sufficient for the solar energy needs. The applicants are proposing to extend their rooftop area, which triggers the need for a height variance. As our OCP development permit guidelines and council strategic priorities all support the need for more energy efficient buildings, staff are supportive of this variance. In summary, DP 500 seeks to allow for the construction of 2 building mixed-use development offering 4 residential apartment units consisting of 45% of gross floor area and a diverse range of employment spaces consisting of 55% of the gross floor area. The development complies to many aspects of the 2 form and character development permit guidelines, including the eclectic and funky and creative guidelines of the downtown south area. A comprehensive table can be found in your report and highlights that the increased roof massing is commonly not supported in those guidelines, but in return does allow for energy efficiency buildings and more covered outdoor space, which is compliant. The property's entrance is uniquely located at the end of Cleveland Avenue. As part of the approved rezoning and land development agreement, the applicant has agreed to upgrade both the laneway and Cleveland frontage from their south property line to Vancouver Street. The proposed preliminary design is depicted on the slide, but may be subject to change at the time of servicing agreement. The design includes advisory lanes in the back laneway to accommodate both vehicles and pedestrian movement. Cleveland frontage includes an asphalt sidewalk, a boulevard, on-street parking and loading, one driveway access to the existing adjacent north property, and boulevard furnishings such as seats and bike racks and street trees. The upgrades also include a paved drive aisle for fire access and upgrades to stormwater management. The development provides 4 residential parking stalls and 3 commercial parking stalls, with 7 commercial parking stalls paid out as cash in lieu to the amount of $105,000. This is in accordance with the zoning bylaw. As part of this DP application, council will also have to consider an amendment to the existing land development agreement. The amendments include replacement of 1 dedicated rental unit with secured employment space, a decrease of the estimated CAC amount from $43,380 to $33,260 as a result of less residential floor area. Staff are supportive of these amendments because the 1 unit was dedicated as market rental, non-affordable rental, and the development is now more in line with the OCP land use designation for the area and the intention of the MUD2 zone. Further, the difference in CAC contribution is mitigated by the increase in parking cash in lieu required for this increase in employment space. So DP 500 was presented to the advisory design panel on May 16, 2019. The ADP passed the following motion that the advisory design panel generally supports the project and would like the applicant to work with staff to resolve some panel's recommendations. So in response to the recommendations, the applicant modified the development plan to address the following items summarized in the table. They include clarifying light wells, addressing front massing and windows, enclosure concerning hallway space, and bathroom accessibility upgrades. This development is in line with 3 council strategic priorities: the planet and environment through its proposal to achieve net zero and requirement to meet step 4 for residential, the economy and local jobs for the amount, diversity, and flexibility of the employment spaces provided in this development, and neighborhood connectivity in public spaces as the market alley and creative design of this development offers an inviting space to support community connectedness and social gathering spaces. DP 500 project was posted in the district's development showcase. 12 requests for a public information meeting were received within the 21-day showcase timeframe. So a public information meeting was hosted on June 12, 2019. The PIM requests, along with 8 comments, were attached to the report. Since report publication, 5 more were received and should be in your package in blue this evening. In total, 2 comments were in opposition of the development and 11 were supportive. Variance notices have been sent to residents within 100 meters of the property as per the legislative requirements. So staff's recommendation includes authorizing the mayor and corporate officer to execute the land development agreement amendment. It also includes the council authorized development permit 500 for the property 37781 Cleveland Avenue, subject to bonding for landscaping, covenant for the step 4 in the BC Energy Step Code, and for residential, and maintain a minimum of 140 meters squared of PV panels on the rooftop, 105,000 cash in lieu in places of 7 commercial parking stalls, and a noise advisory covenant advising of the industrial noise presence in the area, which is a requirement written within the MUD 2 zone. And that it supports the following variances to section 3983 maximum height, from increasing it from 15.6 meters to 19.45 meters for the purpose of the PV panels. Alternatively, council could refer this development back to staff or can amend the cash in lieu provision to be a 50% split between the alternative forms of transportation and the off-street parking reserve fund. Thank you. At this time, I welcome any comments and questions.
Councilor French.
I believe I heard you say you have some additional slides. I'd like to see those.
So we did some research just around different light well examples for everyone this evening. This is one from 245 East Georgia Street. This is an example of an infill development between 2 existing buildings. There's a building that's 2 stories high that now is 12, I think, stories high. They included everything. The piece in yellow is the light well, and green is the balcony that's attached to that. I have another one here. This is another infill project in Vancouver at 135 Kiefer Street. This one has, I'll get my cursor over here, that has these light wells plus kind of a balcony component with it here. What's interesting about this project is that it's actually getting infilled. It's currently going to the city for a development permit right adjacent to that, so filling in that gap. And the photo here on your right is the photo of the adjacent building that's coming in, and they're actually using this light well to allow them to have these windows in place as well. So it's allowing both developments to have the natural light to come in. This is a photo of the balcony space in green here. These are examples of what we have in Squamish today. This one is currently in construction, but this is 2-0 lot line, and these are just light wells. They're not balconies, but they are. They could be enclosed and serve the same purpose of creating natural light. This is across the street is kind of a courtyard example, just an example of how these courtyards or light wells can look once they're fully enclosed. This example I find is really relevant. This is one from Toronto, where you can see how these spaces and the light wells can create these livable spaces. These are the light wells in yellow. This is their balcony on the top floor, and this is kind of a nursery on the 5th, and number 5 right there. And this is just the light right here. This image doesn't really show very well, but there's a brick wall basically right in front of it. But it's still, the natural light still can come in, and it does create some natural light. This is the bathroom natural light that comes in from this light well, just from this corner right over here. There you go. Those are my slides for those.
So, the term drip-through bar gate, I've never heard of that, and it never occurred to me to figure out what that is when I was going through the report. And now that I'm sitting here, I'm realizing I should really understand what that is. Can you paint a picture for us or explain what that is?
Sure. I guess what's different with some of these examples are that they're classic balconies where they have a roof and they have a floor space, where drip-through bar grate decks are fully open. So they would be metal open grate panels. Something that you would maybe, I guess you've seen them maybe before walking on a sidewalk that was maybe open in an area like that.
One more. So with this development being right up to the lot line on the north side, and the north side property potentially one day wanting to redevelop the same height to the zero lot line, what happens then? Can that be done? Is it functional? Does it work?
Through you, Mayor, yes, they can build up, the adjacent property can build up to zero lot line, and they can fully enclose these balconies and they would still be functional.
Yeah.
So maybe not exactly the same, but we have put covenants on properties, I think, to deal with the fact that there will be industrial noise and so on, to ensure people are aware going into it. And, you know, is that the sort of thing we should be thinking about here, given that people who buy initially may not expect that's going to be closed in? Or do we feel that's unnecessary? Or what's been the experience in some of these other places when those wells have been closed in by new development?
Hi, Madeleine, Mayor. I don't believe we've done it in the past at the district. I think when somebody is buying a property, you know, they should be reviewing their disclosure statements. The property, the building is right on the property line, so we expect that people would investigate what they're buying. But if council wishes, you could put a condition, and there is a variance in here to put a covenant on.
I saw some hands over here. I think Councillor Race and Councillor Anderson.
Well, I had a question around the adjoining lots who also may build right to the lot line, and they are under no obligation actually to have corresponding balconies or windows even. It could be just a firewall. And as I was thinking about that, then I wondered, well, what would you ever use that balcony for? And the only thing I could come up with would be a great place to grow dope from or something like that. It's kind of secure storage. And sorry, idle lines. But I understand it. And I guess my first concern was whether or not it would prejudice the adjoining lot owners. And then does this figure in the FAR? Does it that space figure in the FAR?
It does not.
So it might become in effect closed-in storage, which ordinarily would, I suppose, figure into the FAR if the guy built next door.
Well, through you, Mayor, the roof would be enclosed, so it really would be fully enclosed space. So you could, your adjacent, the units above would still be airflow, still be light flow through, so it wouldn't be like an enclosed space. That structure would not, the roof structure is not a proper enclosure.
Oh, I see, so it's still open. Okay. The other question I had was with respect to the height variance. And if I understand it correctly, because the picture looked a little bit different, but it's not just a roof structure we're talking about, it's actually, is it closed in on four sides as well?
Correct. That's to support the roof structure.
Beg pardon, sir?
That's to support the roof structure.
Is it not possible to have it open, or is there a reason it's enclosed?
From our understanding, that would be, there's load on a roof, and you would need a certain amount of walls to support that, and so that's why those walls are there. And it's also to be in line with the elevation and the building itself. It could also is applicable to the set requirements too, just to have that consistency in the walls. It is open, just to clarify, it is open on, let's see if I have this photo here. It is open right here. So that wall massing does get broken up again at the top. So this is a wall and surface as well. Is that clear?
And that's just enclosed space for
So-
anything particular?
Through you, Mayor, it's open outdoor space, it's just covered outdoor space. It does not impact gross floor area, it's not sellable area.
Councillor Anderson?
During 2015, the district was engaged in an extended, substantial discussion with industrial interests on the waterfront regarding covenants and their nature. And one of the issues that came up relates to the prospect here of the neighboring property being developed right at the property line and closing in these things, and that is provisions to alert existing and future owners and tenants that these provisions must be durable. And this did come up in discussions of the industrial covenant for the oceanfront. That's one question, is are we sure that, or are you comfortable that we can put in place a durable disclosure statement for tenants long into the future? Secondly, regarding the noise covenant that is mentioned here, I presume that this is yet to be drafted, and otherwise, how might the existing oceanfront noise covenant or an industry covenant serve as a template? And I'm also interested in understanding the geographic scope of where staff believe we need these noise covenants relative to waterfront industry.
So the third question is a bit out of scope because we're just dealing with this DP. So that would be, the question that needs to be around the development permit in front of us.
Yes, so as a development within downtown south, is it our understanding that downtown south will trigger this noise covenant? That's my question. Third question. Thank you.
So through you, Mayor, working backwards to answer that last question, yes, this is a requirement of the MUD 2 zone. So it's actually written inside the zone. That's why we're requiring it here today. It is intended to only be for that downtown south area because downtown south is supportive of light industrial uses. So it wouldn't spread out to other areas in the downtown. The noise covenant has actually, we secured this with the last DP. So this is the second MUD 2 zoning that has come forward with council, and we already have drafted a noise covenant and have secured that with the first development permit that came forward. And then the first question, that
The durability of the noise covenant, so that it gets passed on from one owner to the next through the disclosure statement.
I can tackle it for you, Mayor. So the requirement in the covenant is that it be presented to every occupant or owner. So whether the units are going to be rented or owned, the covenant has to be presented to them. And the other thing I was also would like to mention is that the purpose of this covenant is because it is a mixed-use building. It's what's happening on the property or on the adjacent properties, not about what it could be happening with heavier industry further down south.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner.
My first question is on the light wells. I appreciate that there's the drip through bars, but if it's habitable space, which is likely going to be used for storage because that's what a lot of people use their additional space for, and or just hanging out. If I look at some of the pictures that are on there, there are nice lawn chairs that are extended. How does that drip through grate still facilitate the light falling through if people have covered the area with things?
Yes, through you, Mayor, the light wells itself are 10 feet wide, so they're actually quite wide. I don't know if you see other decks around town, it's hard to fill all of that space. So my reaction to that question is that it would be really tough to enclose every single surface of that 10-foot wide balcony.
If I could add.
Yeah, sure.
The other aspect of this that could be considered is the fact that there will be a strata corporation here in this building, and they will have a strata bylaw, and they will have to deal with those internal matters rather than the district having to take on the enforcement of it.
And I'll just add further is that this surface is not a typical floor surface, so it won't always be able to support things that are a little smaller. Like maybe it could support a larger chair, but it'd be hard to support a table because the legs might fall through. Do you know what I mean? So there's some limitations as to what this deck would be, or balcony would be able to support.
Continue.
Okay, then my second question is about the height variance, and I'm curious, for a number of other projects, we've requested that the additional height actually gets stepped back, so it doesn't have that same impact. Was that considered in this particular process?
Through you, Mayor, the height is stepped back from the laneway and from the Cleveland side, so to us that was met that condition, as well as this was kind of, it was a give or take. We either had to step back from the side or step back from those frontages and to allow for the surface that this development required for the PV panels.
Councilor Pangill, do I see your hand?
Yeah, two questions. Are there any best practices or standards for the size of these light wells? It seems the lower floor you live on, the bigger light well you would need to actually still get light through. And so is there any sort of guideline around that anyone's following? Or?
Through you, Mayor, not to my knowledge. I will point out, though, that the first, basically 3 floors, so that 5-meter high ceiling height ground floor, plus that story above, they're all employment space, and it's only the 2 top that are residential. So if the concern is for residential, those are the top 2 units.
And the other, there's a second structure now. The building is split up. Is there not an opportunity to put solar there as well and then not need that, or is the sort of proposition that the builder will only do solar if they get the height variance?
Yeah. Through Mayor, our understanding is that this was to achieve the net zero and to achieve the step 4. They would require this surface on the top of that roof. My understanding is it might have to do with if you have a lower building and you have another development that comes higher beside that, it would actually impact the solar rays to actually access those panels. And so there's the higher the structure, the higher the solar panels are on a building, the better you can articulate those panels to get the most solar view. So my understanding is that they probably would not be viable on the rear building. Sorry, that's a very poor explanation, but.
Going back to the light wells, you mentioned earlier that the roof isn't totally enclosed, but it looks from all the drawings that the roof line is solid and goes right to the edge of these light wells. So that when the other building goes up next to it and potentially achieves the same height, no light gets in.
Very good question. So this, just to remind everyone that the green line is actually what the allowed building height is for the MUD 2 zone. So the adjacent buildings would only be able to achieve that green line there. Through this variance, they are getting that extended height, which is where that roof structure comes in play.
So why couldn't the neighbor apply for the same variance?
Well, our understanding of this variance is that we're supporting this variance because they are trying to achieve a higher step code. Not all buildings are going to come forward with that.
But all buildings need to be net zero ready by 2032, so we could expect over the next 10 years that many, many buildings are going to come forward, and they will be looking for height to achieve solar access. So is this a race to higher buildings? I mean, we have to contemplate that 2032 is not that far away. And so if this gets that height, then the neighbors next to them, if their building is 15.6 and they want to put up solar panels to achieve net zero on their building, they're shadowed by this. So that means they would have to achieve the same variance in order to have the same access.
Through you, Mayor, that's a very valid point, and I think there's a lot of flexibility in this zone and flexibility in those lots. They aren't covering all of the lot, that the adjacent buildings could take some of that into consideration, and it wouldn't be an imposition to the adjacent development.
I mean, what it does for council is point out that there's a hole in our policy here about protecting rights to solar access. as we prepare for net zero homes. So that's something that we're going to have to look at as a council. And it's come up in other jurisdictions about how do you compensate a homeowner who's spent $30,000 putting solar panels on their house and then suddenly don't have access to them anymore because the city is zoned for something that's 19 meters high right next to them. If the homeowner decided to keep their single family home but wanted to make it net zero ready, we've just potentially created a shadow that prevents them from making their home net zero. So these are, my biggest concern is that we have to anticipate that the building next to these guys will get the same height variance, in which case the roof design for this building doesn't work for those light wells.
Fine, if I may. As Carrie pointed out, the buildings are broken up on the property. So I think when the next development comes in, it will likely have a variance request on it. We're going to have to work with that property owner on making sure that it works for both properties. But as Carrie said, there's still room on this property to have a different alignment for those solar panels, maybe on the next on the next building, on the next lot, so that you still have the light well possibility on this lot.
I'll also add just that if the concern is for the north property is a corner lot and would definitely have to be redesigned differently, just because of the limitations of having 3 frontages. So it would be unlikely that they would have a complete mimic of this development.
Which sort of proves that we are limiting the options for the neighbor to the north. They have greater setbacks because they're on a corner lot. We may be approving quite a large variance on the roof height here. And so if you didn't have this walled structure in the middle supporting the solar PV cells, you could just put up tilted panels right on the 15.6 meter allowed height and achieve it that way, and on top of the elevator shaft. I'm just concerned about how we've designed this roof, because if the neighboring lot finds a unique way to meet this height for their own needs, then we're enclosing all those light wells completely, and they won't achieve their purpose. Council, any other questions? Councilor Herbert?
Thank you. When I look at this, the top of the elevator shaft, I felt that the roof wasn't solid. It was a structure that the panels mounted to, so like beams or something to allow the light to come through, given the light well situation. But I miss the fact that it's a solid. None of these really give me the angle to see down, and I saw the walls going right up, but I was under the impression it was more open up there to allow giving those levels, but that's solid all the way across. Is that correct?
So through your mayor, I believe that what's under discussion is this particular roof piece. All of these other are open and bar grate, but this particular piece where the panels are on are a solid roof.
Any other follow-up, Councilor Herbert?
Well, thank you for that clarification.
We still have to go to public for comments too. Councilor Pango?
Just so I'm clear, we don't really have a discretion on the permit in general, we have a discretion on the variance, which is the roof height. So if we said, we're just not happy with the variance, can the development proceed with the light wells as is? Or do we have some discretion on the light wells in terms of form and character or something like that?
Mr. Valencius?
Through Mayor, if council does not approve the variance, then it'd probably be best to just refer it back to staff, because the permit otherwise isn't approvable in all the form and character drawings. In terms of the light well, yes, the light well is not something that our guidelines speak to. It meets building code, and so the only portion of the light well that's subject to some sort of change or direction would be that upper section that's subject to the variance.
Councilor Race?
Thank you. So looking at that picture, and that's the Cleveland Avenue view, and you can see that the top part where the cells are is solid, so it relies on the light coming in from an angle. And if a building went up beside it with more or less, well, with a firewall, it would block that off completely. And is that light well the same on both sides, or is it just on one side? Because some of the diagrams seem to indicate that it's only on one side.
So through you, Mayor, the light wells are on both sides. And again, we'll say that the zone is allowed for 15.6. So any adjacent building would be allowed to build to that height. And then if they wanted to go higher, such as this building is doing, they would have to come forward with a variance at this time. And it would be up to council's discretion as to if we wanted to approve it, which allows opportunity to review that development to ensure that it wouldn't impact that particular roof structure.
And you said these are 10 feet wide, 10 by 10, or which is wide and which is long?
They are 10 feet wide, so by what I meant wide was depth-wise. Sorry.
From Cleveland to the lane?
They are from the interior lot line in 10
okay.
feet.
And do you have the length on them?
I can get those, yes. Yeah, they look, I don't have an actual measurement, and maybe the applicants are here this evening and they could potentially confirm that with you. But they look to be about the same depth or a little bit
10 by
wider.
10.
Correct.
The proposal as it is right now does not contemplate any photo cells on the second building,
Correct.
just on the one building.
Correct.
So if we wanted to open up part of the top of the roof, potentially it might work to take those cells and put them on the second building to get the same amount of electricity.
Yeah, I believe the concern with that is that the second building is a lower height and may not be able to generate the electricity that higher solar panels are on.
Thank you.
All right, Council, let's go to the public. So proponent and members of the public do have the opportunity to speak tonight or submit written submissions. Speaking would be to the variance in section 39E3, the maximum height to increase from 15.6 to 19.45. After I've confirmed that it's your turn to speak, you can approach the podium and commence your remarks by clearly stating your name and address, and each speaker will be given a maximum of 5 minutes to address council. So is there anyone here this evening who would like to speak to this variance for development permit number 500? Please come forward. And just don't touch the microphone, they're quite touchy.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity.
So your name and...
My name's Mike DiTomaso, and I'm 37789 Cleveland Ave, the property on the north. We are starting to feel like we perhaps will be affected when we decide to build on our property, and we'll have to take into consideration that development. And it feels like it may pose a challenge for us to actually try and meet what we want to achieve with potentially some solar panels also. So that's I think everything else is pretty clear in terms of where you understand what's happening there, and it's just that. Like, I just feel like we want to make sure that we have the same opportunity to build at the same level and the same thing that they have. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. DiTomaso.
Any questions? Or?
Does council have any questions for the speaker? That didn't look very certain. Councilor Van Gill?
So just from your perspective on the discussion you've heard, what is your current level of comfort with the light wells?
I feel like there are more balconies than they are light wells. I have two concerns with them. There's initially a safety concern just when we're living in the house, and when there's balconies right at the lot line, if there's any items that are placed overhanging the balconies, they could potentially fall on us. And the second one was just our ability to build in the future. And if there's any conflict with the neighbors that are in those buildings who oppose that another building is going to go up against their balconies, we're concerned that there might be something in the OCP that discourages us from building up against there. We're concerned that there might be someone on the ADP that says, hey, let's take into consideration these balconies, and there may be someone on council that says, hey, let's take into consideration these balconies. So I feel like it's potentially limiting us a little bit already in terms of what we develop in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak tonight to this DP? Come forward, Mr. Pryor. Nice to see you. State your name and your address.
My name's Ted Pryor, 40182 Garibaldi Way. And I agree. I think the Councillor Race's point there, I think the covered roof, you could also grow dope up there, Doug. Makes me laugh now that it's legal. Anyway, I think most of you know that I've been in the downtown south for 30 years. And we've built a few things down there and trying to get the neighborhood going. And it's kind of like it was a consensus with staff, planning, and everybody to keep it to small lot development, which I was all in favor of. And I don't know, most people were, but small lot development's not an easy task. You know, like a 2-year process for a single lot is a lot different than a 2-year process for 80 units. You know, and it's costly, and so it's tough. And another thing that planning always talked about was the unique area and trying to keep it unique. And one of the things that was said quite a few times was, in order to do that, you can't start telling each individual what to build and what the design is, or you'll lose that uniqueness. So the architect on this project is a small lot architect and trained in Europe. So when this project came forward, I was very excited because it's unique. And I thought, whoa, this is really nice. That'll go along beside other buildings. So we've been waiting a long time to see things starting to happen down there. And I just don't want to see too much scrutiny put on things that are going to change anyway. And to the neighbor, who I really sympathize with, in their fears of being overpowered by a adjoining building, really is an opportunity for when the time's right for them to move out of the non-conforming little house and develop their property into something that is also unique and stands along beside this one and looks really good. You know, the light wells, staff showed some pictures of light wells in Vancouver, and I thought that was a pretty good example of, you know, like an 8-story building with light wells. And I think the light wells, apart from possibly standing on your balcony and looking down at the neighbors in the yard, of course, until they build a building. And so I don't like to see the future hampered by worries about how they're going to fit the two together. And if you'll notice on this property, the building's right at the front. The adjoining building could be right at the back. They could have their building right at the back, not the front, and that would give it this. Or all sorts of, you know, interesting corner lots. In talking about the corner lots, single corner lots aren't easy. I mean, you can probably have seen a few development signs go up on corner lots and then just fade away and fall over because it's difficult for people to develop. Anyway, so let's see here. I'm happy with light wells. If I was the adjoining neighbor and someone built a building with light wells in it, I'd go, well, you know, I'm going to build a building with light wells right beside yours so we can get some light through there. That's the whole idea of it. When you're driving into town, you see the gas station and the building right there that staff gave us a picture of had the light wells on it. Someday there's going to be a building right up against it. I wonder if they'll put light wells in. The covered roof deck, also a good place to grow marijuana, but it's, in this climate, cover it. I mean, I don't do sun decks anymore without a cover on them. So small lots, like I say, in our end of town, it's small lot development, and it's tough. It's really tough, it's really expensive, and it's borderline almost undoable. And anybody doing that will find it out. Stage 4, so they're building the building to a high quality standard with a new kind of construction, great stuff. It's just, and one thing that I used to always look for when I read these reports was staff's comment. And in this case, staff recommends this project. Thank you. Nice seeing you all. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Mr. Fry. Come forward.
Hello everyone, my name is Chris Hunter, 1001 Glacier View Drive. I'm the architect of the project and also need to disclose I'm a partner in the development financially as well. I appreciate all your comments, and I think I'd like to start out by commending you on declaring a climate emergency in recent weeks. It's nice to see the youth in our community come out and be supported by staff. I think it's equally commendable over the past year that district planning staff, building department, and council has implemented the STEP code. It's a voluntary building code process. So it's great to see that Squamish wants to be a leader in climate action and building code performance. I can speak to kind of the 4 key things that have been brought up. The light wells I have seen firsthand in many urban lots which have 0 lot lines as a way to get light into the center of floor plans. Quite easily that building would look the same with no windows, and we wouldn't be calling it a light well. It would just be an articulation with blank walls. So what you take away for the tenants living in that building are access to light, ventilation in their bathrooms and their kitchen, usually centered in the middle of the floor plan, bedrooms and living spaces to the views. So I think if the light well is really a discussion, those windows go away, and that's the only difference you're going to see in this building. So I think it's very important we think about the livability of these units. Vancouver's changed their tone on light wells to actually encourage them, because quite often what you see in developments in larger floor plates is a den, quote, quote, in the middle of a larger, call it 1,200 square foot apartment that has no windows, and eventually that becomes a bedroom. And I think from a humanitarian standpoint, that's not a bedroom without fresh air and fresh light. So light wells are actually a great architectural move in a dense urban setting as a way to provide that. And I think Carrie's, the one image from Toronto that shows the nursery den flex space, that light well was only about 1 meter wide. And that was a beautiful nursery or den. Our light wells are roughly 3 meters by 3 meters, the size of our room. So equally at the top, if a building did build right on the property line, which they're more than welcome to do, in 5, 10, 20 years, that light well is open to the east and west. So that's something we have control of. So to the east and west, we will always have ventilation coming out of that light well to the top. In passive building strategies, that's called a thermal chimney. So you can open a window on the bottom and it's going to ventilate out the top. So there's only so much we have control of. We don't know what a neighbor might develop or zoning might change. It was C10, the past decade, now it's MUD 2. And as an architect, you have to respond and also predict what's in the future and protect the people who are buying into that project. And I think this is a responsible architectural move that provides good floor plans and some future resilience. Speaking to the photovoltaic and the height, to be clear, and I think Carrie's diagram articulated it quite well, staircase overruns, elevator overruns, and guardrails are allowed above the mud 2 height. So the height of the building, the roof peak, would not change if this variance was not on the table today. Why there is a variance on the table is because we need more roof area, surface area, to support enough photovoltaic panels to try and achieve net zero. As the mayor pointed out, by 2032, the entire province is aiming to meet step 4 of the building code. If we start putting up hurdles for any development, let alone a small lot development, to achieve that, it sets a really poor precedent for people wanting to invest in this community to achieve net zero or high performance building. So I really caution you against that. My development partners are 4 local business owners, community members, trying to prove that Squamish is a place to invest and be a leader in energy performance and housing. And we look for your support. To respond to the neighbors who we have talked to throughout this process, throughout the rezoning process, throughout the public open house and comments, myself as an architect would always react in our design to what is built beside us, whether that's a single family house or a 6-story CD development. There's nothing to say that the neighbor could not do a comprehensive development application and do a 10-story building here. I would have something to say about that, sure, but that is the process, and we welcome them to engage in the process and the public input just as we have. I think the other thing about this project that we were quite proud of is we were one of 17 applicants by the Better Building BC Net Zero Challenge to be selected. We were the smallest project selected out of all of British Columbia. For our project to now get negative support says something about this community, and that would be a shame. I would rather, and it was great to see planning get behind this project with some of the challenges that come along with it and give us support throughout the process, because it is challenging. Trying to fit in rooftop decks for public social space, trying to fit parking on a small lot, giving up a significant ground floor sellable area to incorporate this market alley. All those things a lot of developers wouldn't do. And I think we're trying to do the right thing, and we're trying to do it transparently and collaboratively. And I really hope you consider the complexity of these small lots and the complexity of trying to achieve net zero buildings by 2032, and I think 2021, the next stage kicks in for Squamish. If we're really serious about forcing builders and developers to hit those codes, you have to understand what that means to massing architecture, the spatial implications. This might be the first time you've seen what it looks like. There's going to be a lot more if we really are trying to hit those goals. Thank you.
Councilor Herbert?
I have a question.
Mr. Hunter, I think Councilor Herbert has a question for you.
Thank you. I'm curious about I like the concept of the light walls. There's some great examples there where a building was built right up next to it, allowed to come in. I'm curious on I understand the square footage on the roof to allow for to get enough power from the panels. I'm curious about, I guess we call it the durability of the performance of the light wells, given that your neighbors could go right up to the same height as you if they find the ways to do that. So wouldn't it be more appropriate directly above those light wells to have some material that allows light through, so that in the event of your neighbor building right up next to you, it's not direct light down the light well? Because given that top floor is sort of enclosed, using ultimately enclosed there. So I was wondering what that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely lots of thought put into that. That was our reaction to that was to make sure it's a 12-foot high open space to the east and west. I think the rooftop coverage, when I was on the design panel, was a constant comment that we're building all these rooftop decks around our urban spaces and we don't have covered space. So great to show patio chairs and barbecues 3 months of the year, but what do you do the other months and still enjoy that social space? So it's twofold. I think if that light well was open all the way up to the sky, that light well becomes just a wet trough all the way down to that market alley. So all of a sudden you're walking through your covered market alley and you've got a 10-foot-10 open to the sky for snow and rain. Secondly, structurally, to cut a hole in a diaphragm of a building in our kind of seismic and structural requirements is extremely unrealistic. So I've learned over the process, it's nice to show those things in development permit, but quite often when we get to engage with structural engineers, mechanical engineers, and all these things go on the roof with weight, those great ideas are not achievable. So I think we're pretty honest just from experience about what is needed to support the weight up there, what our spans are relative to the building system we're using. So yeah, a lot of thought to put into it.
Definitely wasn't doubting that. I'm just curious about the material there, if there's an opportunity to have whatever it's glass or similar.
Still a hole in the roof.
Yeah, still a hole in the roof.
So I think that's like the real.
Come in east-west.
East and west, and as long as there's no building on that. I mean, we look at plans in 2 dimension, but in reality, light's coming from everywhere. Even a north-facing space gets a lot of light. So I think in drawings, we can only control so much, and I think that's a realistic and quite generous light well. The light well examples in Vancouver are, I know firsthand, I did a building 2 down from that. They're significantly smaller, and they're beautiful spaces.
Councillor Stoner?
Thanks so much for stepping up. I have a clarifying question about the height variance. Can you confirm whether it's enclosed or covered space?
Sure. So the elevator overrun and the staircase are enclosed.
Yes.
Everything else is covered outside the space, or the light well. So there's, Carrie mentioned there's no sellable space or enclosed space other than what's mandatory.
And then the clarification again that the elevator goes to 19 something meters, and then the additional roof space is that same height as the elevator, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Hunter, does the building still work without balconies?
It does. On the light wells, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
It does, yeah. And that was one option we discussed and one reason why we went to this demountable idea. So I think the windows are more important for the livability than anything. The balconies don't seem to be part of the discussion, but they're not crucial to the scheme. Something we've talked about with planning.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak this evening to this development permit? I see 2 hands. One of you come forward. Thank you.
My name's Perry Vinton. I live at Studio SQ, and I'm in favor of this design. It shows some thought and forethought in what we need to do. Too often, the rooftops of buildings in the downtown core are desert. They create a heat funnel. They do not put value into the building, and this is a problem that we're going to be facing throughout our redevelopment of the downtown core. Now, they're only asking to put a structural allowance to allow them to support the actual mechanics of generating power for the building. They're not turning it into actual sellable or livable space. So this is just purely a factor of engineering. You could do that with steel pipe and not have to have a solid wall. Light wells have been done way back to the 17th chapel. They have been proven to work, and those buildings are well over 30 meters tall and have been standing for hundreds of years. So the same idea that he's trying to propose here has been done throughout history. And just take a look back at history to get some idea of what they're trying to do here. Now, as for the balconies being grates, New York balconies were fire exits, and they extend well over 60 meters. So they are open grates. They've been on the buildings for almost 100 years and have still been proven to be functional. Now, a variance to the fire code would say, you know, what's on there, will it burn? That has to be discussed. But the basic principle is history. He's got it right. You know, the fundamental structures of what they're talking about is good. And until Squamish starts to imbibe these, we're going to end up with the projects. We're going to end up with the big square buildings that are torn down. Do you have internet access? Could you put up the iron building?
Might take me a second if you want to continue.
You want to speak?
The iron building is a standard of architectural engineering and design. That's well over 200 years old. It was designed to fit the property. Yeah, that's it there. That is a wonderful piece of architecture and engineering. But it is for what it was. It was designed to fit a tiny corner lot and to go as high as the engineers at that time could allow. New York was not about to change the streets in order for them to build a building. Just like Squamish isn't going to change its streets or its abeyance to build something, they had to evolve and become more and put up something like that. We need to encourage designers to get that kind of building. It's not like the New York projects. It is something of stature, something of engineering, something people actually come to see. We need to talk to that level of design, engineering, and architecture in our own city. And we need to encourage it. We need to shop for it. We can't wait for it to come to us. So, yes, I say give him the variance and say to the building next door, build to the same height. We've got a light well here. That's a perfect opportunity for you to evolve your design. You know, encourage the ironworker building. Don't say, no, we don't want that here. This is going to be this problem. It's solvable. We have the history to show that it's been done. Use it. We know that that structure works. Use it. It's hundreds of years old. We've got new materials, new ideas. Great. But put them into practice with that level of skill and design and engineering that makes something truly beautiful and beautiful for hundreds of years. So that is what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Saw your hand. Yep, come forward.
Hi, my name's James King. I live in Brackendale. I'm a partner in the development, and I'm interested in speaking about best practices in relation to the Better Buildings Challenge and the Net Zero Challenge. My responsibility for the development is to run the economic viability and to deal with lenders, and also in this case to deal with quantity surveyors to discuss the ratio analysis that goes into pulling this off. And this is really, really expensive to do some of these things and to achieve this step 4 or to achieve net zero. It's not in our favor to do this in some cases. The opportunity cost is if this gets shut down, we can omit the light wells. We can omit the solar voltaic panels. But where we lose out is the performance of the building. And as Chris mentioned, we were acknowledged as being one of the participants that was involved in best practice towards environmental sustainability. And sometimes when you're on the leading edge, you can be on the bleeding edge. And I don't want that to happen here. I think that in this case, when we look at things, this has to evolve. A lot of what they were encouraging us to do in the Better Buildings methodology was to lay out things that were different and lay out things that could help change things into the future. And they wanted to use our development in mixed-use development to kind of champion that. And so my hope is that you can look beyond some of the small details on the micro level, but look at the macro aspect that this is going to be a higher performing building, and this will be one of the best practices that was acknowledged by people and our peers to do so. So my hope here is that this building could serve as a template so other people in the neighborhood in smaller developments, especially urban infill and mixed-use developments, could not only build these things, but help make them more lendable and viable into the future. Thank you.
Anybody else from the public or the proponent want to speak this evening? Council, come back to you. Any other questions? Council Pangill?
So just looking at the drawings, so the light well is facing north. It looks like to me, it's a little bit hard to tell, which is just why I'm clarifying that there's a solid walls along the east and west, or is it open on the east and west?
Through you, Mayor, I've just pulled from the Schedule A, which is the architectural package, and as per what the applicant was speaking to, these are actually open. These are the east and west walls in which he's referring to. So although the roof is covered with these PV, with the roof structure here, the air and light can still ventilate down to the light wells through these areas.
And then if we said, we were comfortable if there was a covenant, is that something we would refer back to you, or we would just sort of say, yes, with a covenant, and am I correct in understanding a covenant would just sort of be an official, in this case, an official sort of notice to put a real estate agent on the hook for notifying any prospective buyers, essentially?
Through you, Mayor, yes, this council can choose to put that motion on the table for this DP.
Any other questions or comments on the DP itself? Not just the variance, Council?
I'd just like to make one clarification, and just for context for council's consideration this evening. This whole lot is 557 meters squared, and the actual rooftop panel itself is roughly 140, and that's what we're securing in this in the condition, and that's about 25% of the lot. So back to the further point earlier, where there's a lot of flexibility for other adjacent developments to move within that 75% to allow for potentially keeping that light on the north or south side.
Was there another hand? Did I see yours, Councillor Rees?
Yes. Just on the point of Councillor Cuttengill raised about a covenant, we're talking about in the proposal, the covenant about noise, for example, in the area, just to ensure that there is no issue with adjoining properties. Would it be possible, or would staff have a recommendation one way or the other about expanding that covenant to just give notice that it may be possible in the future for adjoining property owners to build to the lot line and cover those balconies up, just so they understand their position vis-a-vis the adjoining property?
Through you, Mayor, yes, you can. We could craft the edit to that condition this evening.
One of the things in the staff report says that the difference in CAC contribution is mitigated by the increase in parking cash and lieu amounts required for the increased employment space. But those are two different pots of money. So one is not a trade-off for the other. I'm wondering how staff came to that conclusion.
Through you, Mayor. You're correct. It's not comparing apples to apples. We are proposing that the money for the commercial parking go into sort of an active transportation fund, which does correlate with our partial purpose of the CAC fund as well. So although it's not the same, it's somewhat comparable. The council can, that's one thing that we didn't talk, every time there's a commercial parking cash and lieu contribution, which is allowed in the zone, council has discretion whether that money gets directed to alternative modes of transportation fund or to a parking fund, which is essentially the difference between the two is one is more centered around active transportation. The other one is about providing more parking downtown.
So that's not part of our decision tonight, or it is?
That is part of your decision tonight, yes. In the recommendation, it is recommended that all of that money go into alternative mode of transportation. But council could choose to put half and half or one to the other.
Is there a loading zone?
No, there is a provision in the MUD 2 zone that allows for on-site loading, or off-site loading, which is basically on the street. It's not a requirement of the zone.
And can the ground floor space be used for industrial purposes? Does it have a big open door at the back? It's got the higher ceiling height to gain the extra height, but is it actually industrial space? Because we talk in the report about staying true to the roots of downtown south.
Through you, yes, so there is no loading bay. There's no loading bay doors like you would typically see in industrial. The vision for this area is that we wouldn't be seeing any kind of heavy or medium-sized industrial uses in this area, kind of eclectic artisan uses, manufacturers at a lower level or amount of production, and so they wouldn't necessarily require these large loading bay doors. There is also the market alley, which allows for a larger area to access and get into those commercial units that way.
Light industrial, though, is contemplated in this zone, as is brewery or alcoholic beverage manufacturing, small-scale manufacturing, which may require delivery. So I'm just wondering what the access is to that space, or whether it really is just commercial space.
At this time, we don't review or we don't secure the uses of those spaces.
It's forming character, which is, can it be used for the uses in this zone? Which is anything from light industrial to business and professional.
I mean, remember, the intent of the zone was to keep flexibility, and so each project has the option of how they want to design the space, and by the default, it will then be more useful to certain uses in the list, but it's not a requirement to accommodate every possible use.
I guess I was thrown off by the reference to keeping true to the industrial roots of downtown south in the report. But it looks like it's being primarily used for commercial use.
At this point, we don't know what the uses will be. They meet the requirement of higher ceilings on the ground floor, which will lend itself to certain industrial users. And I suspect that as tenants get involved in the project, as the project is getting closer to completion, they will be looking at things of what works for each tenant.
And is there a maximum number of parking spots that we can take cash in lieu for in this area?
Or a maximum amount for the whole area? No.
No, but for each lot?
Yes.
What is that?
So it's per lot and per the square footage requirement. So they get 4 right off. If they have a requirement for 4, they can apply to cash in lieu for all 4 of those right from the start. And then after, if their square footage it requires more, then it's a 1-for-1. So they provide 1 parking stall and get 1 cash in lieu, 1 parking stall and 1 cash in lieu.
Any other questions, council? The word wall on the pathway to the back, what will be on the word wall?
At the advisory design panel, the landscape architect said that they would make reference to the logging heritage from in our community, and so it would be kind of word walls that represent the industrial use of logging in the area.
Any other questions, council? If we wanted to approve this DP but with the light wells but without balconies, is that an option, or would it have to go back to staff for that?
I think it would be, this is not something that we've explored with the applicant, and so I think we've heard from the applicant today that without the balconies it could still make sense. So it's up to council. I think it'd be good to check in with the applicant because it's something that they've applied for, and so if council wants to approve something different, then we have to make sure that the applicant consents to it.
Council, does anybody want to move a motion at this point? I don't see any more questions, so Council Race.
I'll move the staff recommendation with the addition to the covenant of notice to adjoining property owners that there may be development of the lot line. Notice to development, adjoining property owners may develop to the lot line. I'll speak to it if it's seconded.
There's a seconder. Councilor Stoner, seconds.
Thank you.
Councilor Race.
And so actually, despite, I guess, maybe some of the questions and comments, I actually really like this, and I like the imagination. I like the walkthrough, sort of shopping mall access piece. I guess I'll just have to wait and see what happens when adjoining properties build out and how that might affect it. And maybe they'll take advantage of that, and maybe they won't. That would be up to them and how it might ultimately shake down. So looking at this building, I don't have a problem with the height variance. I think it's good to encourage solar panels, and if that's necessary to do that. It is open to a certain extent. I guess my only concern would be, it is solid above the light well, but there is other points of access for light and certainly for ventilation. So I leave that to the applicant. My other concern I had expressed was for the adjoining property owners, and that they are not prejudiced by this, but I don't think they will be. In fact, it may be an advantage to them, as somebody pointed out, to actually complement that particular architectural feature. But I think it does show imagination. It's not easy sometimes to squeeze a building onto these small lots. Former Councillor Pryor is quite correct in that. Who has not lost his eloquence, so I'm happy to support this.
Thank you, Councilor Rice. Councilor Stoner and Councilor French.
I will also be supporting this. I want to flag that I think many of my questions this evening are a result of being fairly new to this chair, and then also recognizing that this is a fairly new zone, and so we are setting precedent to some degree, and I think challenging and having discussions around these points is really important as we move towards potentially setting new precedent. I do want to commend the developers on the creativity of the project and for seeking the energy efficiency step 4 and net zero ready. I think that is the direction that we want development to be going. We do want to be leaders in that in the community. We did declare a climate emergency a few weeks ago, and by 2032 this is the way that buildings need to be built, and so I think supporting that now is important. But it does definitely recognize that some of our policies and procedures are not necessarily contemplating all the potential consequences. So I think the mayor did speak to, are we supporting a race to the top? There's this fine balance between incentivizing this sort of development, and then where does that tipping point come to be where this is just the norm and we need to actually make sure that we're not over supporting it. So I'm happy to support this. For now, I think there still does need to be a level of support for these sorts of projects. So I'm happy to do this here. And then with regards to, I do think that there's concerns and valid concerns with the neighboring properties, but that is just a challenge of a neighborhood in transition. And I don't think it's fair to slow down one developer as a result of not necessarily knowing what's going to happen next. Recognizing that this does potentially set precedent, there's validity there for whoever else wants to come forward and develop something new. By all means, this neighborhood's up for grabs. So.
Councilor French.
Thank you. This development definitely does put check marks in a lot of boxes for me around building energy efficiency design. I was nervous about the balconies and the light wells when I first read this report, but now that I better understand what the objective is and what's trying to be achieved, I think it's workable, and I do have consideration for the neighboring properties. Although one of the advantages of being first is you get to be first, and then the properties on either side will have to deal with what they've got in the development that got there first. The parking situation, I think too often we are not demanding developers to put an appropriate number of parking spaces into their projects. This might be one of them. I'd rather see the cash in lieu for the parking go to the parking fund as opposed to the alternative transportation reserve fund. I'll be supporting this.
Can I just clarify, is that a separate motion or is it tied up in one of these?
Through you, Mary, it
Oh,
would
there it
be
is.
a separate motion. The motion would have to get.
You'd have to amend the motion, Councilor French, to make that change. You may want to test the waters on that after you hear from your fellow councilors.
Yeah. Can we hear from the rest?
Yep. Thank you. Councilor Anderson?
In the consultations with a variety of interests in the neighborhood, I'm impressed with the enthusiasm for the creative mixed-use district, MUD 2 zone. And we're still learning about this, and so it's nice to be able to have this opportunity to explore some of its issues. And I'm particularly pleased that we're here having this opportunity to include, or with the participation of future developers within this zone. The topic of pedestrian safety and convenience and parking issues has perhaps been too little addressed this evening. We've been focused on other areas. With reference to the option of parking fund or alternative forms of transportation reserve fund, I do appreciate Councillor French's remarks about our issue with parking everywhere. But in this area, I note, and we have received correspondence on pedestrian safety issues just within the last few months from neighbors in the area, that the priority should be pedestrian safety. With their truck route, with business traffic, which is no doubt going to increase, with lacking sidewalks and infrastructure, I would recommend that we do adopt the recommended approach of staff that the money, $105,000 cash in lieu, be directed to alternative forms of transportation reserve fund in this case. So otherwise, I'm happy to support the recommendation as is.
Thank you, Councillor Ford, and then Councillor Race.
Yes, thank you. I'll be supporting this. I was happy to see the addition of the covenant. We heard from the opponent tonight that the project would work without the balconies in those light wells, but I think if we're going to have them there we should be using them, and people purchasing them should understand what the possibilities are. So I'm happy with this change. The building and the level that you're building to is what I'm going to expect to see going forward. So thank you for setting the standard. I look forward to seeing this, and I look forward to seeing what the rest of the neighborhood builds out with your standard that you've set with this project. So I'm happy to support it. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Councillor Race.
Thank you. And I put my hand up partly to comment on Councillor French's comment, and I tend to agree with him about where those monies might go and have it go to parking structure or parking process rather than active transportation in this particular case. I think that's more appropriate. So if the motion ended up there, I would support that. The other thing I forgot to mention is because there has been talk about the balconies and what happens if you fill up the balconies with stuff and how does the light get through, and it's that kind of a thing can be dealt with if the developer chooses to do so by strata bylaws, which are initially in the first case drafted by the developer. But to me, rather than us try to regulate that, I think that's more appropriate for the strata corporation and ultimately the residents. It would be to all of their advantages to have some guidance on how much they could cover those balconies. So it's something that can be dealt with, I think, by the developer and subsequent owners.
Councilor Pengil?
I'll be supporting this. I was a little bit unsure with the light wells, and I sort of wonder, as I heard the discussion, if we had just called them ventilation wells from the start, if maybe there would have been less need for discussion. But thinking of them as light wells with the covenant in place, understanding better the size and that residential in the top 2 floors, I'm a little more comfortable with the balance between, not wanting to constrain what the neighbors might do versus what the neighbors might do, constraining this and getting that balance. I think we've got good enough. I am a little bit still uncomfortable that we sorted out our viewscapes versus step code and all these things. Just interested to see how these things move forward. In terms of the parking, I'd be more inclined, given all of our other policies, to see us go towards active transportation at this point.
Councilor Harford, I'm going to come back to you. You didn't talk about active transportation, I don't think, versus parkade.
The active and alternative transportation, I think for this particular development is where the fund should go. This is part of the development was that sort of walk through and just allowing more fluid access through the properties, and I think that that's one of the reasons that I'm supporting the alternative funds transportation reserve fund for those funds to help tie in. My thought is we're going to help tie in potential sidewalks in the area to help with the foot traffic in the area. So I'm happy with where it is here. So that actually going to the alternative forms of transportation.
That's 4. I mean, you can still try. I won't get in your way, Councillor French, but in the interest of time.
I'm not married to it, so let's carry on.
Okay. If you wanted to vehemently fight for change someone's mind. I really like a lot of things about this building. And as we had speakers comment, it is difficult to develop projects on these small lots. And we do want a really eclectic mix of buildings in downtown South. That was the whole point of the MUD 2 zone. I definitely supportive of light wells. They make abundant sense to me. I'm not really supportive of balconies in light wells and creating the expectation of outdoor space when it will get taken away. If it was like a little Juliet balcony or something, but when you create large 10-foot by 10-foot sort of spaces, you create a lot of different kinds of potential uses out there. So I'm not sure that was thought through. I hear that my fellow councillors are supportive of putting the covenant in place. So there's no point pushing against that. They feel that that's enough protection. I think the balcony should have been pulled back from the lot line somewhat, limiting that space for people to overhang the current lot. So I think it's a shame that that's not going to happen. I think that's still a large space, even if we had pulled it back from the lot line, and still achieves its purpose. It's exciting to see builders start to take up the challenge of creating net zero buildings. And I think we'll see more and more. I am going to get nervous, though, about how we imagine our community when everyone is trying to achieve net zero from different forms of energy. And I mean, that's the challenge of the conversation we've started with the climate emergency. And so it'll be up to this council with our community to figure that out. some people might use solar, other people might want to tap into neighborhood energy or other sources. So it's an interesting future to imagine. I certainly heard the proponents say they wanted us to focus on the macro things, but council is also responsible for taking up the little things and making sure we get those right too for the community. So it's, you know, I hope more builders look at this project and see what's possible. I think we have to just be more cautious in the future about how we use light wells and contemplate the future that is a little bit uncertain at this point in terms of what architecture will look like. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for a great discussion, council, and thank you to our community for speaking to this DP tonight. Okay, so next up we have development permit number 504-38935 Queens Way. This also has a variance. And we'll turn over to staff for the presentation, and then we will once again go to the public for comment.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Elaine Naseby, and I'm a planner with Community Planning. This evening, I'm bringing forward development permit number 504. It's located at 38935 Queensway, and this is a development permit with height variance. The DP application seeks to allow the construction of one light industrial building on a cleared, disturbed site. The surrounding sites are also undeveloped, disturbed sites. A recently developed, multi-tenanted light industrial complex is located across Queensway to the east. The parcel is zoned I4, which allows light industrial uses. So the proposed development is mass timber construction. This means that the walls, roof, and the floor are cross-laminated timber, or CLT, with glue lam, engineered wood beam, and steel support structures. The 28,000 square foot building would be purpose-built to house local woodworking and fine furnishing manufacturing facility Leon Lebanese. It would be located on the ground floor as well as a second level mezzanine. The third floor would have 4 leasable light industrial spaces as well as a maximum 30-seat cafe. The cafe is permitted in the I4 zoning and would be open to the public with a rooftop patio. The applicant has a vision for the building to be a creative hub for light industrial businesses. The waste room has been sized in accordance with district draft guidelines as an accessory building. And so the building is in Development Permit Area 9 for form and character. It's also in Development Permit Area 2 for protection from flood hazard. So this requires that the building is raised from the existing grade and meeting flood construction level, or FCL, and also the maximum height provision restricts the building's height. The building has been located in the southeast corner of the parcels, putting the parking and loading spaces to the rear, providing a building presence along Queensway. So the vehicular and pedestrian access is from the north access road. The parking, so the vehicle and the loading bay parking for this development meets and exceeds the zoning requirements. And so for active transportation, the proposal includes a 2-meter pedestrian sidewalk on both frontages, also allowance for a bike lane on Queensway. A statutory public right-of-way for the Queensway sidewalk would be provided as it is located on private property. And in order to increase neighborhood connectivity, the applicant offers to provide a gravel sidewalk on the frontage of the undeveloped adjacent parcel to the south, which would create a temporary connection from the subject parcel to a recently approved development permit at 38931 Queensway. So for form and character, the building is clad with a mix of vertical stained cedar slats and blackened steel panels, which provides a tie to the wood manufacturing occurring within. The east and the west walls are perforated with continuous glazing, allowing access to natural light, ventilation, and views. Windows on the lower floor lighten the building from the northeast corner, which also provides a public view into the manufacturing area of the factory. The placement of windows breaks down the massing of the building. The south facade must be non-combustible construction for building code reasons. And the third floor has been cut back on the west side to allow for a green roof and an outdoor patio for tenants and the general public, which also reduces the massing of the building. The blackened steel panels at grade provide durable surface for the manufacturing use. The building is designed so that the second floor provides a large weather overhang above the main entrance. And a poured-in-place concrete retaining wall of 0.6 meters in height is proposed to run along the Queensway frontage in order to raise the site grade. These precedent example images show the mass timber construction, the wood cladding, the blackened steel panels, and the clear-story glazing. Images of the open shop factory area and the open stair to the upper levels are also shown. The wood cladding will be of varying depth, which will provide textural quality to the building. So for the landscape, there are street trees included on both frontages. Trees along the south property line create interest for the building's south facade. Trees in the parking area are tall, deciduous trees providing vertical contrast to the building. And a green roof on a portion of the second floor roof increases the landscape on site. There are evergreen plantings on Queensway, creating year-round interest, and mass plantings of ornamental grass and perennials are provided throughout. So this project was shown to the district's advisory design panel, or ADP, on May 16th, and the panel was supportive of the project as presented with few concerns. So a variance is being sought to increase the building's height. The rationale is that the light industrial units on the third floor require a thick floor assembly and high ceilings. So currently the zoning bylaw for I-4 restricts the height to 10.68 meters. The variance sought is to 12.1 meters, which would be a variance of 1.42 meters. The business park zoning was recently updated through bylaw 2663, which was adopted on July 2nd. The bylaw amended the I-1 zone to a new I-11 zone, which included a height increase up to 15 meters to reduce the number of height-related variances in the business park that are sought to offset the loss of height due to the flood construction level and to achieve more substantial employment height on the upper stories. So the subject parcel is zoned I-4, which was not included in bylaw 2663. Therefore, a variance is being sought with the same rationale that there was for the I-11 zone. Further, staff will be bringing forward a zoning update to I-4 to propose a similar increase to the maximum permitted building height. Development Permit Area 9 guidelines regulate the form and character for this industrial development, and the proposed project meets Development Permit Area 9 guidelines as well as OCP policies and objectives regarding employment space. The proposal aligns with council priority areas by maximizing the use of existing infrastructure, creating new employment space in Squamish, and providing active transportation links. The staff recommendation is that council authorizes Development Permit 504, subject to the provision of bonding for landscape, registration of the following covenants on title. So one is flood hazard, another is a statutory right-of-way for public access on the Queensway frontage, a boulevard maintenance agreement for the street frontage landscape, and then also securing the gravel sidewalk on the adjacent property to the south. Also, that DP 504 includes a variance to the maximum height provision in the zoning bylaw from a maximum 10.68 meters to a maximum 12.1 meters. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Navy. Council, any questions? Councilor Herbert.
Thank you. Speak to the parking for this zone. So I had in my notes that there was projected to be 35 employees in the main space, and my math was 33 parking spots, which exceeded what we needed in the space. But with the cafe, I'm a little concerned. I'm just wondering how we got there, and if that's appropriate for the uses that we're potentially seeing.
Mayor Elliott, through you, I believe the applicant is here, so they can hopefully speak to the number of employees. I thought the actual number was 16, so hopefully they can clarify that.
Councilor Pena?
Can I just get some clarity on a cafe? Like, can a cafe serve alcohol or full meals, and could this effectively be a 30-person restaurant, or does cafe somehow restrict something?
So Mayor Elliott, through you. So the history of this is that when this application was made, it was made under the restaurant provision that's allowed in I-1 to a maximum of 50 seats. With building code, there's an issue going beyond 30 seats, so the applicant told us that they wanted to keep it to a cafe with a maximum 30 seats. Because there's been this recent update to the business zoning bylaw, the restaurant use has now been spot zoned where it is currently permitted, and the I-4 zone through that bylaw 2663 was amended to include cafe use that is spot zoned on this parcel to a maximum of 30 seats. And I believe that staff is bringing forward a definition for cafe in an upcoming zoning bylaw update.
That's a great answer.
So,
do you want to follow on?
Yes, if this precedes that definition, what restrictions aren't there on what can be done with those 30 seats?
Mr. Valenci?
Through you, Mayor. So normally a cafe wouldn't include liquor licensing, so it would be restricted.
All right, any other questions before I go in public? Okay, so the proponent and members of the public will have the opportunity to be heard this evening or present written submissions respecting the following requested variances to the District of Squamish zoning bylaw 2200-2011 in effect at the time of application. As staff have said, that's changed recently. So people should speak to the variance before us. If you would like to speak, just raise your hand. After I've confirmed it's your turn to speak, you can approach the podium and commence your remarks by clearly stating your name and address, and that you please note you have 5 minutes to address council and you should not touch the microphone. Is there anyone who would like to speak this evening to this DP variance?
I guess I should answer the question.
Yeah, come forward to the podium and just your name and address, and if you'd like to answer Councilor Harper's question, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. My name is John Hewitt, and I reside at 38930 Midway. And so to answer Tom's question, so currently we're a staff of 16 in our business, which includes people who work on site in our factory, and then a team of people who work off site. Looking forward in the next 3 to 5 years, we foresee future growth of our business that could see our team expand to a forecasted number of maybe 37 staff. And given the size of the manufacturing facility, I wouldn't foresee there being 37 people on site at any one given time. So it might look like having 2 teams of people that work sort of in the morning and in the afternoon. And in that sort of makeup of 37 people, there would also be 8 to 10 people that are also working off-site. So our needs for our particular business in the manufacturing space wouldn't necessarily be that number.
Do you foresee then having like a portion of the parking lot get staff parking, and then the commercial access or the cafe access and the parking would be at designated spots or something like that?
So in some of the site planning, we've taken a look at sort of some of the southern spaces there that would be intended more for use for our manufacturing needs for receipt of materials and our team. And the more northern, sort of north side spaces closer to Queensway would be kept more for spaces that are upstairs and people are in and out of the capital space.
Thank you. Just one last thing here is that from the May 16th ADP, I said 35, or related to how many employees in the building roughly, 35 to 37 main tenants. I'm not sure about additional upstairs tenants. So the additional spots versus your staff is quite a bit. And I understand you exceed our parking regulations.
Yes. Yeah.
Essentially on us to get about that work. So I appreciate your of what's there with us and support that.
So I totally get that it's a really important consideration. I know when we first set out in Squamish, we were in a building, we leased a space that had very poor, not very much parking in contrast to how much space was leasable kind of thing, and it really didn't work. So it's definitely something that we wanted to we paid attention to that, and parking has for sure been one of the driving constraints on this site. It's not a very, very large site. I think it's definitely something that we paid attention to maximize that as much as we can. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't see any.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Council, any further questions for staff? So I'd like to move the staff recommendation for this DP with variance, seconded by Council French. It's really exciting to see a local company bring forward their own building, and I think it fits really well into the business park. I think it's thoughtful. I'm so excited to see that it'll be made out of wood. We don't get that many, and so I think it'll add a touch of class to the business park. I think it will look a lot better than some of the buildings that are there. So happy to support this. I think it's a really thoughtful design. So thank you for bringing it forward. Councillor Stoner, Councillor French, Councillor Anderson.
I'm also very happy to support this. I think it is creative and innovative, and I love the open manufacturing space as well as getting folks on top of the building with cafe. I think it helps people interact with the business park. And with regards to considerations of parking, definitely might be a challenge, but it is on an active transportation network, and there's a bus stop right outside, and hopefully by then we'll have really fantastic bus service so all your employees can get there on public transit. But no, I think this is a great addition, and I'm happy to support it, and I think the variance makes good sense given the direction that the business park is going with the flood construction level.
Thank you, Councillor French.
Everything I was planning to say is pretty much been said. Love the wood and the look of it. I think it's very functional, creative with the cafe on the 3rd floor. Maybe a little risky. I hope that it works and I hope it pays off. I'm supportive.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
Just a couple of comments. The proponent has been in business for several years in the business park, and I mention that because issues of parking and trucking access are important. They have been topics of discussion for business park proposals we've discussed recently. But that experience means a lot to me, that they know what to expect and what to anticipate as regards to trucking access. A couple more comments. I'm glad to see in the advisory design panel minutes the question is raised, any other green initiatives for this project, and the response is commitment to build the building out of mass timber, BC wood being used. That's a green initiative, and I agree. That's a green initiative. The other comment I'll make is that I note that the proponent would have liked to have clad the south-facing wall also in wood. And the comment is made, again in the advisory design panel minutes, that ideally it would have been wrapped the whole building in wood, but due to restrictions with combustion, this was not possible. I'd like to point out that there are 3 companies in Squamish whose main business is wood cladding. And together they employ about 100 people. And that includes 3 companies. 2 have facilities for treating wood to meet fire safety ratings required. And this is an evolving field. It's evolving for our building code, but perhaps it's an evolving piece of information for our advisory design panel. But there are 2 companies advancing the technology in fire rating wood. Finally, It's not the first building in Mass Timber, it's the fourth. As far as I know, we have the Environmental Learning Center, the new Fergie's building, but the first one was the Squamish Post Office building in 1965. So you're part of a great tradition, Mass Timber and Squamish.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Pennington.
I'll be supporting this. I've seen some of the work that Leon Lebanese has done, and it's quite exciting to see something like this coming to the business park.
Thank you. Councillor Bird.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to witness this next level of your business moving into the space, and I thought I was going to get all the way to me without someone taking that line about having seen the Leon Lebanese work, and I'm looking forward to seeing that applied to this building. I think it's going to be a beautiful building, and it's great to see it moving forward. So happy to support.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, now I've got to talk. I was just going to hold up my hand and support it, but it is another example, like the previous application that we saw, where there's some imagination applied to the building. And even though it is an industrial building and utility is very important, it does show that we can have imagination in the design of these. So happy to support this.
Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Council, we're going to take a 5-minute stretch break before we move on, so we'll recess for 5 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for allowing council a little bit of recess. It's going to be a long night, and that break is really very helpful. So we're back in our regular business meeting. We're at 8A1, District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw Amendment for Residential Rental Tenure Zoning. And so we're having a presentation from staff. It'll be on the OCP, just I see your hand just a moment, Councillor Bird, as well as the zoning bylaw update. We will vote on them separately. Before I turn it over to staff, I will go to Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I'm just going to declare a conflict and excuse myself in this discussion. I own and operate a business that is also a tenant in one of the properties for consideration in this rental. So I'm going to excuse myself. Where should I go? The lobby's full. We usually go to lobby.
You can use my office, or you can use that. So
I can go.
You can go down that way. Yep.
I'll be in the mayor's office.
We'll text you when we're done. Okay. Okay.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Jessie Fletcher. I'm a planner with the Community Planning and Infrastructure Department. Tonight with me is Brian Daly, our Development and Subdivision Coordinator. We're here to present the Residential Rental Tenure Zoning Amendment and Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw for consideration of first and second reading. So municipalities were given a new authority to zone for rental tenure in May of 2018. The legislation provides local government with a greater ability to preserve and increase the supply of rental housing in their communities. Council directed staff to develop a rental tenure zoning bylaw amendment outside of the comprehensive zoning bylaw update. Council directed staff to only apply the rental tenure zoning to existing rental units to preserve existing rental stock. Staff presented the draft bylaws to Committee of the Whole for feedback on June 11th, 2019. Today we're presenting the bylaws for first and second reading. Staff are proposing to implement residential rental tenure zoning on 12 developments. These 12 developments contain 309 existing non-stratified purpose-built rental units. To get to this recommendation, staff engaged with the owners of rental buildings prior to crafting the amendments by way of telephone conversation and email correspondence. Staff have also reviewed work done in other municipalities to introduce rental tenure zoning. To date, only New Westminster has introduced rental tenure zoning. To support the application of residential rental tenure zoning, staff have drafted new OCP policy. The OCP policy amendments recognize the impact on development potential for the affected landowners by including language that both supports consideration of increased density for sites that have rental tenure zoning, and that reinforces the desire to retain the number and size of rental units in redevelopment. These OCP policies are to be included in Section 12, Diverse and Affordable Housing.
The amendments would limit the form of tenure on affected properties to residential rental for the existing number of purpose-built rental units on the subject properties. Owners of these units or buildings would not be permitted to occupy their units. The only permitted form of tenure would be rental. The benefit to these amendments is that in a redevelopment scenario, an affected property owner would need to provide the same number of rental units that currently exist on site, but may be permitted to develop additional for-sale units that may be owner-occupied. To address council feedback, an average unit size of 76.18 meters squared, or 820 square feet, has been established, which would apply in redevelopment. This number would provide flexibility for the developer to provide a range of unit sizes and types, provided the unit sizes average out to the minimum size. This number was based on national rental data of the average size of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom rental units. The approach of applying residential rental tenure zoning to existing purpose-built rental buildings would have the additional benefit of establishing a definition in standard regulation of residential rental tenure, which then could be applied in the future to any purpose-built rental. The affected developments are located in the following neighborhoods. In Brackendale, 1 development containing 9 units. In Garibaldi Estates, 3 developments containing 76 units. In Wilson Crescent, 4 developments containing 139 units. Downtown, 2 developments containing 56 units. And in Valley Cliff, 2 developments containing 30 units. Staff completed extensive efforts to engage affected property owners prior to drafting the amending bylaws. All but one of the affected landowners were successfully engaged. Staff sent the bylaw amendments to Squamish Nation and to the affected owners. 2 affected owners have written to express concern about the average unit size requirement. Staff note that an applicant can seek to vary the average size of a unit during a development permit process or through a rezoning process. Staff recommend that the District of Squamish Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 2664 be given first and second reading, that consultation as laid out by the Local Government Act has been considered and sufficient consultation has occurred, and that a public hearing be scheduled for September 3rd, 2019. Staff also recommend that residential rental tenure zoning bylaw amendment number 2666 be given first and second reading, and that a public hearing be scheduled for September 3rd, 2019. That concludes the presentation. Any questions?
Thank you. Council, any questions on this one? Councilor Pettengill.
How does CACs interact if there's redevelopment of, from what I understand, they can redevelop some properties for sale as part of redevelopment as long as they maintain the same amount, an equivalent amount of rental. So how would CACs, do we have policy that would apply? We just sort of apply to those owned units, our normal CAC policy?
Through you, Mayor, CAC policy only applies through a rezoning process. There is no, CACs would not be negotiated through a development that was running through the existing zoning, including the residential tenure. So if they were looking to alter the zoning to increase the density even higher than what would be permitted, that would require a rezoning process and there would be a CAC negotiation.
So with this rezoning then, they could, without a subsequent rezoning, they could put residential for sale as long as they maintained additional residential for sale, as long as they weren't over the density and as long as they kept the rental amount the same.
Correct.
Any other questions? I don't see any. We did cover this a lot in committee of the whole, so that's all right. I don't mind a short agenda item. Councilor Stoner.
Going on to the topic of the minimum average size for the rental units, there's one letter in here that details out quite specifically how it might actually result in fewer units than what is currently provided, and I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit. I can pull up the specific letter.
Through you, Mayor, I believe that letter was referencing that the existing number of rental units were substantially smaller than the average size. So the intention of this average unit size is in a redevelopment scenario. So that would be assuming that the existing building would be demolished and that it would be redeveloped. I could see how that would be a concern, but as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, there is an opportunity to vary that provision, the average unit size, through a development permit application or through a rezoning process. So that is obviously a valid concern for a property owner, but there are ways that could be there could be potentially a way to vary that size.
Mr. Valenzuela?
And if I may just add, there are two requirements that you have to meet in redevelopment. One is the number of units, and then the average size. So we would still get the same amount of units. In some cases, the size will most likely, in most cases, will be different than what there currently is on site. But as Brian said, that could be varied, and the OCP policies would support the variance because the OCP policy speaks to replacement of the same, at least the same size of units.
Thank you. So I think what staff is saying is council would have discretion in the future to say, well, if there were only 450 square feet to begin with, can we really ask this developer to do more? And that would be at the discretion of council. Councilor Paglia.
Can you speak to why we chose the national average as our size standard? And I know we have asked for different forms of housing, and presumably that implies different sizes, but at the same time, thinking about climate change and all of these things, I think there's a push to go smaller. So I'm just...
Through you, Mayor, it was challenging to find kind of very specific data relating to the size of units. It was challenging to find it for, specifically in Squamish and the Lower Mainland as a whole. And the national average kind of was something that was seemed reasonable to use, and 700 or I can't remember the exact square footage off the top of my head, but the number that was chosen seemed like a reasonable size to accommodate a wide variety of forms of housing in a redevelopment scenario.
Any other questions, comments? All right. Would someone like to move staff recommendation? Councilor Anderson? Moves, seconded by Councilor Reyes. You're confusing me tonight, Councilor Reyes. Would you like to speak to it?
Well, I was just going to point out that the recommendation that's on the screen doesn't say where the public hearings to be held. I believe it's the council chambers. So the resolution should include that.
It's included. It is at Municipal Hall. It is in the agenda. Yeah. So, Councilor Anderson, you moved the OCP amendment, seconded by Councilor Reyes. Any other further comments?
Yeah, I will support this, although I do have some concerns about whether we should be enshrining in the bylaw the ability to do residential development for sale on these sites. Sort of not settled in my own mind why we wouldn't just say this is a rental zone, full stop.
I think we're on the OCP, but I think people will speak to both. So if you have comments about both the OCP or the zoning, you can speak to them both now. Anybody else want to speak to this? I'll speak to it. I'm excited for us to bring this forward. Not many municipalities have done this yet. I think it's important to protect our existing rental stock. I think it's important for the community to know that in moving this forward from committee of the whole to the regular business meeting, we also said to staff that we need to think about what phase 2 would look like in our zoning bylaw rewrite. So there's other communities that are moving this forward, and we can learn other things from them in terms of how to protect a price point, how to protect affordability as this comes through, and how to avoid getting sued, which is why a lot of communities have hesitated, because developers said that they would potentially come after communities that took any of their rights away. So we're all learning across the province about how to put this into place, and I think this is a really good start for our community, and I think we can do more as we go through our zoning bylaw rewrite. So I'm really happy to see this go forward to public hearing. Councilor Reyes, then Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, and I'm supporting this, and I guess I am speaking to both really. I recall the discussion at the committee meeting regarding for sale property within a development or a redevelopment of these sites, and I think that's important. Judging by comments from the media in other communities, one of the things that we don't want to discourage is these properties being basically rehabilitated and redeveloped, because eventually if we don't allow an economic way for landlords to do that, they will just fall into more and more disrepair. And so it's important from my perspective that, yes, the ability to have for sale units added to it in a redevelopment proposal without losing the rental stock is quite critical to encourage developers to upgrade as market conditions permit. So I think that's a critical part of it, and so I'm happy to support this.
Councillor Anderson.
This I'll speak generally on the staff report. This and previous reports, I feel, show that staff have done a very good effort in robust engagement with the developer community, the property owners. And I also appreciate that the staff report we have before us this evening includes correspondence with those property owners. Some of their observations and concerns will be useful and important for us to consider ongoing as we look for ways to work with developers to encourage investment in rental accommodation. I also note that one of the properties at 1090 Wilson Crescent, because I hadn't seen this referred to, was actually built as employee housing by the school district. And that's just part of the legacy of that particular instance. And I appreciate Mr. Daly's comments that there are methods and mechanisms, avenues for developers to apply and for us to consider creative solutions and engage with them. So I'll be supporting this as presented.
Thank you. I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Someone want to move the zoning bylaw first and second reading with the public hearing on September 3rd. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Pettengill. Any further comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. See you on the 3rd. Can someone text Carmen?
I'll go get him.
I think Jenna can text him fast.
Who knows?
We'll see.
Go. Go, Jenna.
Okay, we are now on second reading, District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200-2011 amendment bylaw for 1145, 1155, and 1165 Wilson Crescent number 2588, 2018. And this is for a second reading. We will wait for Councillor Herford to get here.
He's on his way.
Welcome back. All right.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Jessie Fletcher, planner with the Community Planning and Infrastructure Department. With me tonight is Devin Kianaga, municipal engineer, who will be here to help answer any traffic-related questions you might have later on. Tonight, I'm presenting to you for consideration of second reading amendment bylaw number 2588, 2018 for 3 properties on Wilson Crescent located at 1145, 1155, and 1165. So for background, Council gave the applicant first reading on April 16, 2019 and gave the applicant feedback on the proposal. The applicant has completed the traffic impact assessment early and has attempted to address Council's comments. Staff have reviewed the traffic impact assessment and will include the finalized version with the public hearing report. Staff will provide an overview of the development and then highlight the changes the applicant has made. The subject lands located in the Wilson Crescent neighborhood are a designated residential neighborhood in the official community plan. The application, if approved, would be subject to development permit areas 2 and 3. The properties are currently zoned multiple unit residential 1, RM1. A single unit dwelling occupies each of the properties. The majority of the surrounding properties are also zoned RM1, with the primary form of housing being single detached residential. The property to the north is developed with townhouses, as is the parcel to the south. 5 parcels nearby are zoned RS3, small lot residential, and are developed with single unit detached dwellings. The The applicant is proposing a rezoning that would allow for 2 3-story apartment buildings on top of a shared parkade. Childcare space is proposed adjacent to the courtyard. The applicant approximates that 48 apartment units will be included. The zone allows for a maximum height of 10.68 meters, which is the permitted height of the residential 1 and residential 2 zones and the multiple residential 1 and residential 2 zones. With a 1.5 meter height bonus for achieving step 5 of the BC step code, the maximum height that the development could achieve is 12.18 meters or 40 feet. The third residential story, top story, is set back from the second residential story by 45 degrees on all elevations. The applicant has provided the above rendering to represent the project's potential massing. Statutory right-of-ways are proposed along all setbacks to allow for paved public access throughout the site. A portion of the courtyard will also be secured as publicly accessible by a statutory right-of-way. The rezoning to an apartment use with shared open space with an elevated courtyard enabled staff to seek the statutory right-of-ways over the setbacks. If the applicant had built townhomes under the existing zoning, there would not have been an opportunity to secure these pedestrian connections. One of the comments from the public at the public information meeting was about loss of pedestrian connectivity throughout the Wilson House neighborhood since the development of townhouses where an informal trail network used to exist. This is the first opportunity to try and reestablish a more formalized pedestrian network. The above table highlights the differences between the RM1, RM3, and proposed CD95 zone. The rezoning proposes the density of the RM3 zone but the height of the RM1 zone. The applicant is proposing slightly smaller side and front setbacks and a reduced rear setback. The reduced side and rear setbacks accommodate the required parking to ensure the applicant is able to provide sufficient parking on site for future residents. The zone has a maximum height of 10.68 meters, which is the same height as the existing zone and is the equivalent of a single-family home. The applicant has indicated that they may exceed that by 1.5 meters, which is permitted in the zoning bylaw as a height bonus for developments that exceed the applicable base depth in the building bylaw when the FCL is 1.5 meters above the height datum. The applicant has indicated that they intend to build to step 5 or equivalent of the PC Energy step code and would therefore qualify for the required bonus. The developer is offering to provide a community amenity contribution of $259,000. The above detail highlights how the CAC was determined. It's based on the proposed square footage, and this includes contributions towards critical amenities, publicly accessible active transportation, and park amenities. This will be secured in the land development agreement. Staff note that the active transportation portion may be put towards repainting and creating a safer buffer for the multi-use path. The applicant is also proposing to secure 5% of the GFA or 3 units as market rental, secured with a housing agreement. 1,000 square feet of dedicated indoor daycare space is provided, as well as public access secured through statutory right-of-ways along all setbacks and through part of the courtyard space. A complete traffic impact assessment was required prior to setting a public hearing date. Staff have worked with the applicant to finish the majority of the study prior to second reading. A final report will be provided at public hearing. The traffic impact assessment established traffic volumes on a Wednesday in May with peak travel data collected between 7 and 9:30 a.m. and afternoon data collected between 2:30 and 6 p.m. The traffic impact assessment recommends that activated accessible paths be established on frontages as development continues to give pedestrians a more traffic sheltered option. This will be implemented on the applicant's development. The traffic impact assessment also recommends that traffic calming be implemented by expanding the existing multi-use path and delineating parking, which the applicant will implement but may be counted towards the active transportation portion of their CAC. The traffic impact assessment recommends that a speed limit of 30 kilometers an hour be implemented, which staff are investigating. And it also recommends that a pedestrian island be established at the southwest corner of the intersection of Wilson and Buckley. This would better improve pedestrian safety and better delineate the sidewalk between the intersection and the adjacent driveway. The applicant has revised their site plan to demonstrate that 2 additional parking spaces are possible within the frontage without the addition of a second driveway. Staff recommend that following the Wilson Crescent South Road redesign, which would be a condition of rezoning if it were successful, better design can be sought to ensure both the traffic and pedestrian safety around the proposed parking spaces.
Council raised concerns about the 3.9 meter interior side setback required to ensure that the applicant meets the minimum number of parking stalls. Staff explored some options with the applicant, all of which resulted in a considerable loss of parking. To reduce the impact of the exposed concrete parkade wall, the applicant has proposed to line the wall with vertical gardens as shown in the slide. The growing medium would be installed on the wall, and this would be secured in the land development agreement. The applicant mostly meets the guidelines of the Wilson Crescent microplan, though there are some guidelines that the proposal does not meet. The Wilson Crescent microplan directs properties consolidating more than 2 properties to rezone. The intent of limited lot consolidation and subsequent requirement of rezoning allows council to consider whether or not the proposed scale of development is compatible with the neighborhood. Section 4.12 of the plan indicates that buildings should be a maximum of 3 stories. The upper story is set back as mandated by the plan. Maximum height is in line with what is currently permitted in the existing zone. This is also the same height that neighboring properties can currently achieve if they were to be developed without rezoning. Section 4.20 calls for an increased side yard where any 3-story or higher buildings are proposed adjacent to lower density height or uses. The parkade does not meet that as it is permitted to be 3.9 meters from the interior lot line, while the residential stories are proposed to be a setback of 4.57 meters. To offset the impact of this, the applicant is proposing a levee wall to make the area more welcoming. Staff recommend that council approve amendment bylaw 258A 2018 for second reading.
Thank you. Council, questions? Councilor Tango?
Just in terms of landscaping and living walls and that sort of thing, I understand that we can compel that as part of permitting and all these things we do up front. But 5 years down the road, is there any mechanism that we do or that we even could if we wanted to ensure that living wall is still living and hold the strata accountable? Or
I mean, put in there, it would be just like any other landscape requirement that we usually have. So for the development permit, we review the landscaping, the irrigation drawings, and that should ensure that there's enough growing medium and water in the system to establish the vegetation. And then after 1 year, it's really up to the property owner and the strata to continue maintaining it.
Councilor Herford?
Thank you. In your presentation there, you mentioned potentially below grade. I remember there were questions when this was before us last about water table and the actual end elevation as far as where the parking was going to, the level of parkade is what I was speaking about. Where are we at in that process? Because to me that affects the overall height of this building, which is one of the issues we're discussing right now.
Through you, Mayor, the hydrological study won't be permitted to occur until the wet season occurs, so it couldn't start until the fall. With the zone that's proposed at the moment, if they were to sink the parkade, they could still in theory meet the same height unless the land development agreement specifies something different.
I didn't hear that last part. What did you say?
So in the event that the hydrological study said that they could sink the parkade, the zoning as proposed would still permit them to go to the same height, which is the height they can currently achieve. But the applicant has indicated that they would go for a lower height if they could sink the parkade to offset that.
And is that something that we could stipulate to the lowest, the parkade be lower to the lowest reasonable level to minimize the overall height of the project? Because that's a variable that's still sort of floating around for me. I'm not entirely comfortable with yet.
Yeah. Through you, Mayor, that could be secured through the land development agreement.
Good. Other questions? Councilor Race?
Well, just on process, there is no resolution setting a time for public hearing, which I assume will be sometime in the fall. Was the intent to have that after the study, the hydrological study, or are the two related at all?
Through you, Mayor, the two are not related. The applicant had requested more time to further develop the project before presenting to public hearing, but was seeking some certainty of second hearing before putting more money into the project.
So we wouldn't necessarily know the results of the hydrological study before perhaps third reading?
Through you, Mayor, no, unlikely, unless it was delayed until the spring.
So the land development agreement would deal with that issue.
Other questions? I've got a few. Anyone else have any? Are all the variances on the setbacks related to fitting in parking? Rear, side?
Through you, Mayor, so the only setback that exceeds what's currently permitted is the 3.9 meter for the parkade, and that is entirely to fit the parking on the site.
That's the rear.
For the side setbacks. The rear setback was again for the parking.
So they all are related to parking?
Correct.
The side setback we talk about in the Wilson Crescent micro plan is that if the building exceeds a certain height, that the side setback should be even further. In your drawings, it looks like the parkade wall is there, but we don't step back that first row of homes to try and achieve that setback. We only start setting back higher than the first level. Did we contemplate trying to set back above the garage?
The zone stipulates that above the parkade, everything is set back to 4.57 meters, so that's an additional 6 meters from where the parkade is set back.
Can you just go to your drawing of the
Absolutely.
building?
This one right here, so it's not.
That doesn't look set back.
No, it doesn't look set back, but the zone does stipulate that it must be set back an additional to 4.57 meters, where the first story here is 3.9 meters. And so this is step back to 4.57 meters, and that is stipulated in the zone.
All right, so there is a slight setback.
Correct, yes.
But the zone says to step it back further than that if it's going to be above 3 stories, but we've still allowed it to be sitting at 4.75.
The Wilson Crescent microplan recommends that the step back of buildings that are 3 stories or above be more than the 4.57 meters. This does not meet that policy in entirety.
Increased interior side yards to be provided beyond the current 4.57 meter zoning bylaw setback requirement where new 3-story or higher buildings are proposed adjacent to lower density height uses. So isn't that this case?
Correct.
So shouldn't that first floor be set back more than 4.75? 4.57?
If I may add to this conversation, this was a negotiation that we went through with the applicant, and what they ended up proposing is balancing the sort of courtyard space and the fact that they're building to the highest step possible under the building code, the step code. That's the rationale.
So the courtyard is bigger because we don't do the side setback. That's larger than 4.57.
Correct, and also the building is a few levels above the efficiency zone we would require.
I get that, but also we can't set out a plan and then just kind of ignore the plan because all buildings are going to go in this direction. So at some point, we've got to adhere to our setback rules, even for energy efficient buildings. So I struggle with that one a little bit. Do we have any pictures of what this looks like if the parkade is lowered? Because the hydrological study says it can be lowered.
Through here, I don't have a rendering of it below grade.
Do we have a picture of the road right away with the changes suggested by the traffic study?
Through here, no, we don't.
So do you have a picture of what the front of the lot looks like?
Of the current condition?
Yep.
I believe I just have the existing homes. I don't have the existing.
Or a rendering just that shows the front of this development. Okay, so there's a pathway in front of this. it looks like there's the asphalt and then a bit of a curb and then the trees, and then there's a sidewalk or a pathway.
There will be the multi-use path that's existing will be expanded from the 1.7 meters that it is to a wider 2.4 meters.
And so the trees still fit in that boulevard with the expanded path?
Through there, the final design of the landscape will be determined at development permit.
And then where is the parking getting delineated?
Through the on-street parking or the childcare parking?
On-street.
On-street. The on-street parking is delineated on the other side of the road. As it is now, it's just currently not painted.
So is it just like a white line or?
There'll be a white line to delineate where the parking is, which would thereby narrow the travel lane to 3 meters.
Okay. And when you say you're investigating the 30-kilometer-an-hour zone, can we not designate that as a municipality? I mean, what's to be investigated? I'm just a little bit confused by that.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Yeah, we are looking at or planning to implement that, but we need to ensure we're following the correct process.
Okay, so it's a process, not a, we can't do it. It's just we have to follow the right process
Correct.
to do it. Okay. Any other questions, Council? How's it going?
Just trying to remember back to our previous discussion, but for step 5 in particular, my understanding is building articulation is very challenging, and so whether that's stepping back levels or just not flat faces, is that correct or?
Through you, Mayor, it is more challenging to have different projections on the face of the building. It's not impossible, it's just more expensive.
Councillor Stoner.
In our previous discussion of this at first reading, there was some back and forth about the impact of the daycare parking spots and how that would interact with the parklet. And so does the assignment of these 2 specific parking spots remove that interference between the parking and the parklet?
Mayor, the way that they've aligned them right now doesn't interfere. Staff aren't satisfied that it's the best alignment at this time. However, we are confident that there's room on site to put the parking spaces. Again, the green space hasn't been finalized, but what we were looking for from the applicant was to see that we could accommodate 2 drop-off spaces on the subject property and not to take up additional spaces on the road right-of-way, which is a concern that we heard from the community. Without a final design of the layout of Wilson Crescent, which staff are recommending as a condition of adoption of this rezoning, it is challenging to finalize where those spots should go, whether they should be layaway spots or if they should be where they're located right now.
Following Councillor Race's question about why we're not designating a public hearing date, you said that the developer wanted more time to work on this development. But generally, we see a development, give it second reading, and that's what goes to public hearing. So I'm a little bit confused by the process of not having a public hearing date and that this might change between tonight and some future public hearing date. So what are you anticipating might change before we set a public hearing date?
Through you, Mayor, the applicant had communicated that they wanted to put more work into the floor layouts to show what the units may look like at the end. The final zone, we don't anticipate would change at all, nor would we recommend that it change at this point in time. But the applicant did wish to put more time into what the layouts of the actual units would look like, and that they were, in the applicant's opinion, different than traditional residential units or apartment units.
But the footprint, you're not anticipating would change, or the massing in any way?
Correct.
Where is the daycare located in this building?
The final location of the daycare has not been determined at this time.
For you, Mayor, if I can just add, that will probably come with the layout of the units so that we have more precise information at the public hearing.
And staff is comfortable that if we go to public hearing without knowing the exact height of this building because of the hydrological study delay, that's supportable? Or once we have that information and changes, does it require another public hearing if the building's?
If I may, we've always asked the applicant to design the building for the worst case scenario in case that water table is really high. But given the fact that the height that they're proposing is the same height that they're allowed to build right now, and it's a relatively low height, 10.68 meters plus the 1.5 meter density bonus they get, we're comfortable with that.
Any other questions, council? All right. If you all want to go home, someone has to move a motion.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Race. Do you want to speak to it, Councillor French?
Yes. It's been a long evening. Like we've heard with some of the other developments tonight, I see this as development that moves our community forward and moves this neighborhood forward. I have some level of concern about where we're at with the height uncertainty, not knowing where the daycare is going to be. I think I can live with that, and at this point I support pushing this forward.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Herford?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that overall this is a good project, and I appreciate the energy efficiency that's being going to be executed here. I really like the covered rather than having parking in a big open asphalt parking lot. I really like having that courtyard and sort of having the parking underneath. So that courtyard I'm okay with the side setbacks, given that we're not having a big parking lots, exposed parking lots. I think that's a good trade-off. I am concerned about I guess the overall height. I'd like to see down just because I feel like we're always maximizing. So if there is a way that we could just put it into a height that is less than the maximum, I think that would be a pleasant change for all of us. But I'm generally supportive. I would like to see this as before we go to public hearing as well baked, as thoroughly baked as it can be. So given that hydrological study and final layouts with daycare, where the daycare is, will make a difference into where the street parking is for daycare drop-off and so on. I think that's an important piece, but overall I like it. But there's definitely some pieces that need to be nailed down, and I would like to see those done by this point, but I think to have a good time at the public hearing, they'll definitely need to be flushed out by then.
Thank you. Councillor Reese?
Thank you, and I'm supporting this at this stage. This is second reading, not final approval, of course, but I think it's, for me, it's close enough to certainly justify going forward to public hearing. There are aspects of this I like. It's part of an area that we are trying to densify, and this looks so far like a good solution to that. So I think it is supportable at this stage, certainly, and something to take to public hearing.
Councillor Stoner?
I will support this moving to public hearing, but I think there are still some outstanding concerns, and I think that there will be some changes that I would like to see come forward between now and then, and that includes further fleshing out the site plan, identifying where the daycare is, what does the landscape look like, what does site flow look like, I do recognize that it is meeting the height requirements and the allowable height with the density bonus, but there are other asks that are coming forward from the developer, and that includes the setbacks are not meeting the neighborhood plan, and there's an increase in the FSR, and I think that there's a fair bit of give there that we need to recognize, so that yes, it might meet the height, but there are other pieces that that it's not meeting, and so I think that as we go to public hearing with this, we will hear feedback on that. So if there is opportunity to drop that parkade down and the overall height, I think that that could go a long way. I know that that's waiting on the hydrological study, and I said this at first reading, we might want to consider holding off until we have clearer information there, because I think that will really change the neighborhood's perception of this project. And I'll leave that with staff and the developer to consider moving forward.
I'll be supporting this. I generally like the project, and there's some things I do really like about this. I do, understand the developer's desire to have the confidence of a second reading, but granting that without some of the information kind of makes that second reading a little less, something you can have a little less confidence in. So just, the more information you can have by the time we get to the public hearing stage, I think that's going to be really important.
Thank you. I'll support second reading. I think it's good to see that 2 parking spots would fit on site, but without knowing where the daycare is, it's hard to know what the flow looks like from those spots. They just face a wall right now, and you've got little kids and a stroller, and it's raining and all that sort of stuff, which the developer is aware of. It's got 2 little kids. What that looks like, I think it's important to consider. I remember the parklet and whether that would be sacrificed. I know at the corners we've got those sort of cement step downs, and I wonder if there's a softer way to treat those end points so that the massing isn't just so large to the adjacent properties, and whether that becomes the living wall wraps around and that becomes more of a parklet at the corner of each of these buildings. I'm not sure, but if we're going to do pullouts for the daycare rather than those 2 parking spots, then maybe we look at how we create the parklet further into, maybe on the corners here. It's just something to play around with, because I still feel like the massing on those front corners with adjacent properties feels big because we're not providing that larger setback. I've always really appreciated that this is going to step 5. Excited that 2 in one night of the things we've contemplated are meeting higher environmental standards. It's pretty exciting. I think for public hearing, it will be really important to have that overlay of what the streetscape looks like and some sort of what that pedestrian island looks like at the end, and what the streetscape will look like when these improvements would be made, so that the public can see that. And I do think, as one of my fellow councillors mentioned, is that we need to capture that height piece somehow so that the public has confidence that will be higher than this, and it would be preferable if the hydrological report allows it to go lower. So I think we do need to capture that so that the public has certainty. And whether that's through the land development agreement or some other covenant, I think the public would want us to enshrine that somewhere. Other than that, I'll look forward to hearing what the public has to say about it. Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, council, dig deep. We got a bit more to do. Mr. West, this would be your opportunity to address council. You have 5 minutes. So you can wait till staff changes over if you'd like.
Well, council, thank you for letting me speak here today. It's very refreshing that we have a different sense of relationship now than we did the last time when I was standing at the podium, which I'm very grateful for.
First of all, I just wanted to say that in going forward with this bylaw and everything surrounding the idea of vehicle residency, visitors and locals, we want to make sure that the long-term solutions are where the focus heads. It's really important that we have systems such as permits that will help mitigate some of other home residents that believe that there's free loading going on among those who choose to live in vehicles. Safe lots for, there have been acts of vandalism and threats of public harm towards members of the community. So things like that are in the interest of the community. We have a couple concerns, but with the bylaw, one is the extension of the bylaw affected area to Powerhouse Springs Road, where there's a couple of crown parcels. Now, we've maintained that those areas are areas that are away from residents. There's a toilet out at the end of the road there. So those are good spots that are out of the way and wasn't originally going to be affected by one of the more recent bylaw drafts. Committee of the Whole did direct staff to extend, but we just want to make it known that we feel that it could have been done a little bit differently. The other aspect we're a little concerned about is we're hoping for a seasonality portion. The narrative around the bylaw has been that this is mostly a seasonal issue, and unfortunately, my understanding is that because of the bureaucratic process, something like staff didn't have direction after Committee of the Whole to put seasonality in there. So we would like to see that as part of this bylaw. As trying to address the long-term concerns and the long-term solutions, things like permits, safe lots, or whatever other comprehensive solutions that we're going to be working on. We've proposed a pilot project that hopefully can be implemented in a relatively quick manner. We know that council's going away for summer recess, and so we've tried to put something that can be supported by council, supported by members of the community, and really kind of mitigate some of the negative side effects of the bylaw going forward. Things like, instead of the intention of folks going to legal campsites, ending up in neighborhoods where it's going to anger residents with people parking in spaces they shouldn't be, and those kind of associated issues. So we want to help mitigate the risk. It's something where we don't want to be contravening the law, we don't want to be upsetting people, and we also want success for the overall community of Squamish in going forward. So we do want to support the bylaw going forward, but we want to make sure it is known that we are only supporting the bylaw knowing that there is a motion and more steps being taken towards the comprehensive long-term solutions. And we also are hoping that the proposal that we have put forth can be considered as something that is worth exploring with staff and can be implemented in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to see me. So I will go over to staff now for your presentation, and then we'll go to council for your questions.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Natasha Golbeck. I'm the Senior Director of Community Services, everything is on the speaker, the Bylaw Enforcement Supervisor. So just a note before I start a very brief presentation that you have some blue sheets in front of you that are amendments to the notice enforcement and MTI bylaws that were in your package. We had some administrative challenges. Schmozzle, is that the?
Typos.
There's schmozzle is the technical.
Typos.
Typos. So that's why you have those. So just to remind us all about the overview, the purpose of implementing this bylaw is so that enforcement officers have a tool to assist the movement of seasonal campers to campsites. That is, the tool is a last resort, and the enforcement approach will continue to be education and awareness first. Enforcement will also continue to prioritize the high risk and high impact locations in terms of wildfire risk, wildlife attractants, and waste management, and poor camping practices more generally. Our objective as bylaw enforcement is always to achieve voluntary compliance. We came to Committee of the Whole on June 25th with a significantly scaled back version of where the bylaw would apply, and Council asked us to include a few other areas. So since that time, we've included the Powerhouse Springs area, and we've had some discussions with the landowners and tenure holders along Powerhouse Springs, and think we have some good work ahead of us with regard to working with the private landowners so that campers have consistency in what they can expect regardless of the ownership title of the land that they're on. So aside from that, as Mr. West indicated, we're feeling very supportive of developing an engagement process for a safe and sustainable model for our year-round vehicle dwellers, as well as continuing to work on workforce housing and affordable housing through other programs in the district. So if Council wishes to proceed following adoption, we will do officer training and public education and communications. Some signage will take place, and we will continue to work with the private landowners, particularly those along the Powerhouse Springs area. And that's it. Questions?
Council, any questions? Councilor
When we extended the map to include Powerhouse Springs Road, there's some crown parcels there that Mr. West just referred to. I'm curious if those parcels are directly accessible or if they're accessible via private land, or if you know.
So these parcels right here. Oh. How do I make it be this one?
You just wave a wand.
Honestly, that didn't work. Slide it over? No, that didn't work.
Slide it, grab it, fling it.
Let's take over here, Mr. Baker. I had no idea about that trick. Okay, I'll just throw that. Sorry. So you are referring to, do I have a cursor here on this magical screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is. So you're referring to right here.
Okay, yeah.
These parcels right here.
Yeah.
And so the those are the yellow is the private parcels.
So there is.
And the hatched out, these light pieces here are
Crown land accessible by road.
Accessible by Powerhouse Springs Road. You do not have to go through private parcels to get to the crown land.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Brown.
Thank you. Your next steps slide excluded something I was expecting to see, which was ongoing discussion with residents and dwellers associations, or the vehicle residents association. And through this process, I think it's highlighted that there's some other work needs to be done in other areas. So that you're reflecting in that sort of next steps slide. That's more comment, less so speak specifically to that. So then the other thing was Regarding the seasonality, has there been any consideration, do you see any challenges or benefits of considering that?
Yes, we do. Do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I guess, well, the challenges would be clarity, for one. When you alternate something back and forth, it ends up being harder to get that message across. And then I think, the reason to do it would be that there isn't a wildfire risk in the winter, but then the other risks still exist, like disposal of human waste and things like that even become more difficult in the winter. So, and then also just wanting to, one of the reasons was just wanting to strike a good balance between the different groups here that we have interested in this bylaw. Just one more. If you'd like, I could make a comment about your comment. I think that it's definitely something exciting, but I think it makes sense to separate it from the process of this enforcement tool.
The engagement.
Yeah, and what the future for that solution looks like. I think that's a separate discussion from what we're looking to achieve here.
I don't see any more hands. I will move second and third reading. Seconded by Councilor Reese. I think this is a tool that we need, and I'm really happy that our community has started to think about the whole aspect of how we welcome people to our community, how we do that, where they are to be, how we balance community interests with tourism. And I think that's a very nuanced discussion. I don't think there's a clear answer. So I don't think this bylaw is the end of the discussion by any means. Certainly it provides me with an opportunity to really go to the province and talk about the need for campsites in our community and in the corridor as a whole, and I know my colleagues north of me would agree with that. I think we need to look at low-cost campgrounds. I think we have to talk to the province about some of their regulations about 2-week maximum stays in areas where people do come to live for the summer, to work and to play. But my goal is to find enough places in campgrounds over the long term that people don't need to be camping on our roads, that they are places where there is water, there are washrooms, there are bear-proof containers, and we can protect our natural environment and make sure those who don't really know how to do this well have a place where we can help guide them in following the rules and keeping our environment clean, our animals safe, and wildfire from really having a tremendous impact on our community. So I think it's a start. I think there's different conversations here. There's one about homelessness, which I think we've already started to address in our community. That's certainly not who we're targeting with this bylaw. There are people that are living and working here in their vans. I think that is a housing discussion, and for those who choose to live in their vans, then we need low-cost campground options for them. And then there's tourism, and I'm a big supporter of our tourism economy, but also that needs to be balanced with the needs of our community, and our community is quite concerned about this issue. So the best part is we get to learn from communities all across our country and down the coast in the US who are struggling with this issue and trying to find solutions. So we're not alone, and so I look forward to this discussion going forward. Others, Councilor Reese?
Thank you. And I'm supporting this for a number of reasons. First of all, I mean, a large part of what we see on the screen as being regulated area is the wildlife management area. And I don't think there can be much debate about that. It was never intended for any kind of camping activity, and it's even restricted in types of things you do without camping. The other part, I agree with the mayor. This is, to me, is a first step. I think we may not have it exactly right. There may be things that we tweak along this in the future. I think we'll just have to assess that. And when we look at next steps, one of the things that I think we sort of want to add to that is just ongoing assessment to see how this is working or not working. It also doesn't address, as the mayor stated, the other aspect of van living, and that is people who are using that as a form of housing. We still have to deal with that. That is something that is not really, in my mind, reflected in this, trying to accommodate that level of housing in the community in places where people can live with the safeguards that any form of housing really deserves, and somewhere we have to start looking for land for that. So this is, to me, a first step. It's an ongoing process, but I think it's a necessary first step.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. I want to thank staff for their continued engagement on this file and going back to the Vehicle Residents Association of Squamish and other members of the community as we continue to work through this issue, because I think dialogue has been most important as we go through. I will be supporting this. I do see it as an interim solution. I think I mentioned this during the committee of the whole. That really does provide necessary tools for our staff to effectively manage the challenges that we're currently experiencing this summer, given that we're mid-July. It is not a perfect solution, and I think you'll hear around the table, as you have heard from some councillors already, that we know it's not perfect. We'll continue to come to the table and talk about what are the next steps, how do we iterate on this, how do we learn from it. I want to also thank Mr. Rufio for the proposal that he did bring forward and sent to council. It is well researched, there's lots of great suggestions in there, and I look forward and hope that we'll continue to figure out how we start to implement some of those things, like some of the potential parking spots and permit systems, so that folks do have a safe place to go at night. But those are two separate but intertwined issues. In just addressing some of the issues with regard, or some of the suggestions with regards to the amendments to the bylaw for seasonality and scaling back on some of the areas up to Powerhouse Springs Road. I do appreciate the concerns that were raised, but I think for consistency in message and ability for enforceability for our bylaw enforcement officers, it's important to keep what's up there and keep it consistent through the season. And then we can start to discuss what the alternatives are from there.
Okay, I've lost track. I think there was a hand over here. Councillor Rivers, over to you, Councillor French, and then Councillor Bagnell.
Thank you. Yes, I'll be supporting this, and I'd just like to commend the flexibility shown by the staff to react to our community and the fellow councillors to work through this issue. And it's complicated, and there's more than one issue at play here, and on the surface they appear to be the same. So I'm glad we're digging deeper into it, and Mr. West and his group, the Vehicle Residents of Squamish, have been great in educating us on what the challenges are and what the potential solutions could be, and I agree that that discussion needs to be ongoing. I'm looking forward to the post-game on this, so we can roll this out, and I see August, September, as our busy times, and sometimes in fall, winter, we can have a debrief. I hope that's in our scheduling and in staff's work plans, so we can have something in place or any adjustments made to this portion of it in April or something, so we can have run a whole season through, and we're not here again in July discussing this at this level. But appreciate that it took a lot of time to get here, so I'm happy to see that. I'll just look at this.
Thank you. Councillor French?
Thank you. I think staff has patiently worked through this process, and I commend you for that. This hasn't been an easy file, obviously. So there are many people that are living in vehicles and camping in our community. That is going to continue. There's just no doubt about that in my mind. Some of those campers, and I emphasize some, not all, not a majority, but some, are not thinking about wildfire risk, stream impacts, noise concerns in our neighborhoods, wildlife impacts, and just general environmental degradation in our community. So I see this as an important tool to allow our bylaw department to make sure that that small percentage of people who are not thinking about these things are educated. And I go on full faith that when staff says education is going to be the top priority, that will happen. So I'm supporting this.
Thank you. Councillor Tangdale?
I'll be supporting this. I think for me, the idea of permitting seasonality is part of the solution, have a lot of appeal and promise, but we are at mid-July, and I think if we try and work those in now, we're just not going to have something this year, and I think we do need something this year. We've been really lucky, only 2 fires that I'm aware of so far, but I'm not sure we'll be so lucky in August, so I will be supporting this, and I'm eager. I think there's a few other issues, ability to drop off sewage, and I can't remember what the term for those stations are, but some of these infrastructure pieces too that I think need to be part of this conversation. And so I look forward to talking about some of these things at our budgeting process, which is coming up soon.
Thank you. All right, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So on to first 3 readings. District of Squamish Notice Enforcement Bylaw. Amendment for camping, bylaw number 2680, 2019. You don't have a presentation on this, do you? Okay, I see a question. Okay, no, you're moving it. Great. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And the District of Squamish Municipal Ticket Information Bylaw. This is the amendment camping bylaw number 2686, 2019, and it be given first 3 readings. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much for your hard work on this file. Mr. Baker, Ms. Bullock, thank you very much. Okay, we have a staff report, community planning and infrastructure. Anyone's? Oh, Ms. McJanet is still here. Thanks for hanging out with us. Oh, and Anthony's here too. Thank you so much. All right, over to you.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Council. My name is Sarah McJanet, Community Planning and Infrastructure. With me is Anthony Jeffrey, who's our Manager of Procurement, making his inaugural debut in front of the Council. There's no PowerPoint presentation tonight, which is a first for me. And with the report,
but we don't mind tonight. We really don't.
That's what I thought. With this report, we are bringing forward a recommendation to award a contract for design services for a new childcare facility and to seek council authorization to execute a services agreement. And for context, this childcare partnership project has been made possible and is utilizing provincial capital funding available to local governments so that we can construct a purpose-built childcare facility at Valley Cliff Elementary School. School District 48 is providing the site for co-locating the childcare facility, and Sea to Sky Community Services Society is the nonprofit operator that will be providing the childcare services for a minimum operating period of 15 years at this site, and that's required by the funding. The proposed facility is 250 square meters, and it's intended to provide up to 36 spaces, 12 infant toddler and 24 30-month to school age spaces, and it is intended and must be completed by mid-March 2021. The district issued a RFP for design services in mid-May, and it was posted online in BC Bid.
The scope of work for the design services includes developing architectural design, cost estimates, preparation of permit and construction drawings, construction contract admin, building commissioning and warranty work, as well as coordinating required professionals like environmental, geotechnical, and civil engineers. We received 4 proposals and they were evaluated based on the defined criteria within the RFP, including experience, qualifications, work plan, innovation and value adds, and pricing. And our review committee consisted of 3 district staff, myself, Mr. Buxton, and Mr. Jeffrey, as well as the invitation and participation of School District 48, and as well as Sea to Sky Community Services, so those partners were involved with us in the review of the proposals. And together we shortlisted 2 submissions from the 4 based on the rated criteria, and then proceeded to interview and move into the pricing stage of the evaluation process. And Mr. Jeffrey would like to speak or will offer some comments around the evaluation.
The evaluation, as per the competition document we issued, we followed the process. We shortlisted the 2. We interviewed the top 2. The big thing that separated the top 2 was price, and Studio Hub's experience locally. They've done a lot of work here. They know the community. They understand what we're looking for, and they were very enthusiastic about the project. So we're quite excited about selecting them and working with them. We get the blessing tonight, so that's kind of how it went. It's an exciting project we're working on.
So with next steps, after receiving council authorization to move forward with the contract award, we would be moving to execute a services contract and then initiating detailed site planning, engagement, and design work for the future facility. And we're also in the process of drafting the land lease School District 48 for siting the school facility at Valley Cliff Elementary. We've also, in terms of communications with the broader community, just today we uploaded a lot of information and resources around childcare on our municipal website, including information about this project as well as the action planning. And we are working through a community engagement program for this project as well. So there's lots of work around communications and engagement. So with that, the staff recommendation tonight is firstly that the District of Squamish award a contract for design services to Studio Hub for a childcare facility, and that the mayor and corporate officer be authorized to execute the services agreement with Studio Hub. And we welcome any questions or comments about the evaluation process of the RFP. Thank you.
Councilor Herford.
Thank you. I'm excited about this, the prospect of this coming to fruition. I know we need the spaces. Under your the RFP response evaluation process, kind of that scoring chart, and I was curious about the scores. I guess if they were a clear winner, I understood this clear criteria. I was just curious. I'm curious about the numbers and how that works, given that we see the level of transparency for the decision-making process, but that last bit of the scores.
So what we do through the RFP process is we put a scoring matrix in like we did with how we're actually going to score against that criteria. So that's all put out in the document that we issue. You actually end up with the more open, fair and transparent the process is, and the more you specify how you're going to evaluate responses, the better responses you typically get. So part of that scoring matrix is we each individually score them, and then usually 9 times out of 10, the way it works is everybody is on the same page without talking to one another. You know, the cream of the crop rises through the ranks. So the top 2 were a clear top 2. The other 2 wouldn't have been within a winning position if they made it to the second stage. So there's no point going through the interview process or looking at pricing unless they're going to actually still be in a position to win. So we pretty much, that's how public sector procurement works. You create the rules of the game, and as long as you follow those rules.
I was just curious about the final numbers of our top 2, or if you average it out, 6 people evaluated, and the scores out of total points available is 100, so
the highest evaluated got 86 points, and number 2 was 76. So there was quite a spread between the applies to.
Thank you. That's all.
In the staff report, it says, based on final construction costing, the project scope may need to be adjusted to stay within available budget. But when you're talking about scope, you're not talking about the number of spots. You're talking about maybe we don't do that kind of siding or that kind of landscape improvement kind of thing, right?
Yes, through you, Mayor Elliott, the intention is to stay with the number of spots that we have been funded for, and so there will be decisions based on construction costs and just what's happening in the market, and so we'll have to make some sort of game time decisions around trying to maintain the quality and the total area that's required for those childcare licensed spaces, and so we'll be managing that with the design consultants and the team.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Anderson. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for staying so late, both of you. Appreciate it. Okay. Councillor Pettengill, I want you to be on your best behavior for this next item. It is 9:14. Our consent agenda. There's a lot of letters on there. Council, if you have anything to say about any of the minutes on the consent agenda, if you feel that there's a piece of correspondence that needs to be pulled, this is your time to do it, and you can speak to it a little bit later. Councillor Stoner.
I would like to pull the staff update.
The staff update, okay.
Skywich CAC.
Yep. Councillor Anderson and Councillor Pettengill.
Correspondence item number 1.
Councillor Pettengill.
2, 4, 6, 7, and
2, 4, 6,
7, and
7, 15. Not your best behavior, I'm just going to say that right off the top. Was there anything else? Okay. Just 2 and 4. I was going to pull 2 and 4 as well, so those are covered. All right, so with those items pulled, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. I'm starting to forget people's names. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. We'll do the... Where do you want me to do this, Robin? Under correspondence or after action requested?
After
or business arising?
No, after the close of the consent agenda. Isn't that where we typically do them?
Okay, so you want me to do them right now?
You've already done, did you, sorry I missed it.
We just passed the consent agenda.
So I do it under correspondence or business arising, either one. We do it under both, we've done it both ways.
Okay, I want to deal with the action requested items first. So we'll do it under business arising. So action requested, the correspondence from M. Lawrence dated July 4th be considered during the budget process. This is water for dogs from the water park, moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. That Ms. Lurendell's letter dated July 8th be referred to the Director of Engineering. This was for better routes to the Highlands, moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. B. Peters Arts and Culture Heritage Survey, that the feedback from Ms. Peters dated July 5th be referred to the Manager of Arts and Culture. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Anderson. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. That the feedback from Ms. Bonnell on Highlands Way North around speed dated July 7th be referred to the Director of Engineering for a response. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. that the letter from the Gemshidians regarding their utility rates for small business be referred to financial services for a response. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that last name. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, recommendations from July 9th Committee of the Whole, Waterfront Landing, Park North, that Council support the overall design concept proposed for Waterfront Landing, subject to staff recommendations listed in the staff report and other items recommended by Council at that meeting. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. This is from the Garibaldi at Squamish delegation, that boundary expansion for gas be referred to staff for scoping of the project for consideration in 2020 budget with review of the outstanding items from the December 15th, 2015 regular business meeting council resolution. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Safe routes to school discussion, the council refer the school zone. I don't think this is the right motion. It wasn't referring the school zone speed control. It was reviewing a reduction in speed in neighborhoods to committee of the whole. We're going to amend that motion. So it should read that council refer reducing the speed in residential zones to a future committee of the whole meeting for an update from staff and further discussion. And amend the corresponding minutes that came from. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Sorry. Okay. So let's go back to the letters that were pulled. Councillor Anderson, letter 1.
Yes, I take it that this package of correspondence on the camping bylaw includes the presentation on the safe lock pilot project from the vehicle residents of Squamish. And I just thought that we should take a moment to acknowledge this contribution, this very positive contribution to our ongoing dialogue. Mr. West has, in his presentation earlier, asked for assurance or hoped for assurance that more steps are going to be taken. And I think that that is certainly going to be true. And whether we call or whether Safe Lock Pilot Project will be an ongoing title that we pursue, we will certainly be taking into account the very well articulated, comprehensive long-term solutions that are needed. And while there are a number of issues with the sites that have been highlighted in that contribution, the framework and the listing of issues are really very solid. And I think that I just wanted to acknowledge the work that's gone into that contribution, and I think we can assure that there'll be continued dialogue with the vehicle residents of Squamish.
Thank you. Letter 2, Councillor Pettengill.
I just wanted probably to flag this. I think for the budget process to have a better understanding whether our resourcing capacity for this sorts of thing matches our desire to talk about food security and those sorts of things. So I just want to have a better understanding if those are aligned and we need to adjust something there. And I think that's probably a topic for the budget process.
Budget or zoning bylaw?
Sorry, choose the ALR farming.
Yeah.
Yeah, so budget.
There have been a number of instances when we had to deal with the district to prepare a property. I'm of the opinion that people in the district office who have dealt with have no practical knowledge of farming and resort to district bylaws for all inquiries. So they're talking about the alignment between bylaws with the ALC and the SORD.
Oh.
And the district of Squamish.
Yeah, the way I read the letter was their concern was that our capacity to understand the needs of farming and so on wasn't quite there, and I don't know if that's accurate or not, so I wanted to have a better understanding of do we have the resourcing to understand the needs and what's required there or not, and I just don't know.
So you want to refer to budget. I was going to pull this letter to refer it to the Food Policy Council and to our zoning bylaw rewrite.
I'm fine with that.
So I would, are you okay with that? So I move that we refer this letter to the Food Policy Council as well as to our zoning bylaw rewrite process. Seconded by Councillor Anderson. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Letter 4, Councillor Pengale.
Yeah, I was just very concerned that the OGC, I mean, we've got a major fossil fuel project wanting to come here. And they're sending us communication through a web form on our website. And, you know, there's other proposals on council. I've noted they're hosting a CSA, discussion around floating storage and what the regulations should be about that. There have been no regulations in Canada developing this, and as far as I understood, the district had no knowledge of that was going on. So there's been several instances related to this massive project where there's a complete lack of communication. So I was hoping we could send a letter probably to the OGC, the minister responsible, maybe even the premier, just sort of outlining the need for much better communication on these things.
Could we simplify this a little and ask staff to follow up with the BCOGC and provide an appropriate contact person? I mean, if you still, I mean, that's the first step, because we should not be receiving correspondence from the Oil and Gas Commission on our web input form. That is ridiculous.
Yeah, I necessarily, I think there's two messages. One, we need better communication, and two, I think it's important to communicate that there has been a failure in communication.
Okay, so can we do two separate things on this then?
Sure.
So I'll move one motion, which is that staff follow up with the BCOGC and make sure that they've got the correct contact person and tell them how ridiculous it looks that they're using our web form on such a massive project. I mean, we don't add that editorial in the motion. But staff follow up with the OGC to provide an appropriate contact person for future communications would be my motion. Second by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Councillor Pengale?
So I guess it would be that the mayor follow up with appropriate parties regarding our
You have to be more specific, because my appropriate parties could be different than yours. So that the mayor write a letter to...
I will say then the OGC, the premier, and the minister responsible outlining our concern about the lack of communication to date.
Someone want to second that? Councillor Rupert seconds. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Letter 6.
Just wanted to, go Richmond. But wanting to understand, do we have any capacity locally to enact our own sort of rules for ourselves in terms of lobbying, or we don't really have that authority?
We would have to take a look at that. We're not lobbyists ourselves. Staff, council lobby all the time.
Do you mean to have our own registry?
Yeah, or not necessarily a registry, but some sort of policy about how we interact with people, especially developers and so on in our community that want to talk to us as councillors.
Yeah.
Do we need to wait for some sort of provincial thing, or could we enact something for ourselves if we wish to?
No, that's what this is asking for. We don't have that ability right now.
Okay. Letter 7?
Yeah, I think this was just a raw Richmond.
Okay. 15.
This one, and I would take a bit of advice on this. I was a bit concerned by the piece in the BCEAO response, which was essentially, by my reading, that they don't hold proponents accountable for claims they make as part of their application. It's only for things that they define as final conditions. And for me, that's a big concern, because the public, I think, makes decisions and provides feedback in good faith based on the claims being made by proponents. So I think there needs to be some sort of accountability mechanism for claims made by a proponent in their application. So I thought two options: either to write a letter to the EAO stating as such, or that you and your committee work can bring that up. And I can't remember the name of the committee at the moment.
The Environmental Assessment Implementation Committee. I was going to say that the EA office will be going out to public consultation on the new policies and procedures around the Act later this year. Hoping early fall we'll see that. And then we have an opportunity as a local government to weigh in. So we could always refer this letter to that discussion when the public comment period comes out.
I'd be happy with that.
So Robin, how do we capture this so we don't lose it when the public comment period comes out on the EA implementation?
We can go track it for the action tracking.
Okay. Do we need a motion for that, or how do we? Can we help?
Yes, if you put a motion that we'll put it right into the action tracking, it'll get assigned and it'll get flagged and we have to follow up. So, yes.
So move that the letter from the EAO be put in the action tracker for follow-up.
Be referred to staff.
Be referred to staff, put in the action tracker. Good? All right. That was moved by Councillor Pettingill, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Public Art Select Committee, that we received the minutes from the July 3rd Public Art Select Committee for information. Oh, right. Sorry. Okay, so if you're going to do more than move this to staff, I have to recuse myself. So we can't talk about it with me in the room.
I was going to move it to further discussion at a future council meeting.
Committee of the Whole.
Committee of the Whole, July.
So move that the Skyward Committee amending contribution update memo be referred to future Committee of the Whole for discussion. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Pettingill. Good. All right, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. I'm not trying to limit debate, but that is our effort here, is to just move that to Committee of the Whole. Okay, now the Public Art Committee minutes from July 3rd. Move receipt. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Council staff, no in-camera announcements. We've dealt with unscheduled public attendance. Open question period, Mr. Chua. Oh, and you've got one too? You're good? You'll need to come to the podium. Just state your name and what your question is.
My name is Derek Chris. Currently live in Ring Creek, and I'm kind of here on behalf of Thomasina Pigeon, who is out of country right now and working. I just want to do a couple follow-up questions on the camping bylaw. First question, the district. What has the district done to date to gather metrics on this population, this vehicle resident population that's here, that's overwhelming, that's the source of complaints? What's council done? What's staff done? How are you measuring how many people are there? How long they're staying here? What they're doing here? Are we gathering metrics?
Yeah, I can answer this. So the short answer is that we don't have great data. We don't do something like what Metro Vancouver does, a coordinated sort of count of people who are living outside of fixed addresses. We did work last year with the Squamish Access Society, who did a fairly substantial count of vehicles who were in the sort of key climbing areas. And I believe they did it a couple of times over the high season and estimated about 2,000 or 3,000 vehicles per year. We also did a survey through bylaw enforcement of people who are living in their vehicles who did not seem to be sort of recreation-driven seasonal visitors, and we did get some responses. I think we got about 160 responses, and we asked them some questions about their demographic profile and so on. So I have a little bit of information there. I wouldn't call that a statistically significant sample size, but it's better than nothing. And then I believe Mr. West, through the Vehicle Residents of Squamish, and perhaps Thomasina was involved in this as well, did some work gathering some basic demographic information and sort of key issues, as well as a bit of a count of how many people live in Squamish year round. And I think we thought about 200, something like that. Is that right, Rufio?
I'd have to double check some of those numbers.
So Mr. West can't speak unless he's at a microphone?
Sorry.
So, sorry. Just going to ask you to pause for a second. Council, I need a motion to extend by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And I didn't catch your last name.
Chris.
Chris?
Christ.
Christ. Thank you. Proceed. Sorry.
I appreciate the answer from staff. Further follow-up question. I gather that a number of things were considered, like the permitting system, long-term, or seasonal closures on the Mamquam Forest Service Road, or safe lots. How do we know, how do we measure in the coming year whether anything's been done towards affecting those more nuanced solutions? I mean, this bylaw is a bit of a blunt instrument, and it may criminalize otherwise behavior that isn't criminal. So how would a citizen measure in the coming year whether council or staff is doing anything to implement a more nuanced approach to this?
Show me answers. I'm not sure if your question is about the impact or the outcome of the changes, or whether or not changes are being made. Is your question more about whether or not the changes are being made?
Well, under the current bylaw, there's no room for a seasonal closure, for instance.
Right.
I don't see in the language of the text how that can happen. So if we were to implement something a little different, do we come back and amend the bylaw, or what? But also my basic question was, how do we know that anything's actually being done in the course of the next year towards a different solution, or is this just lip service?
Well, it's certainly not lip service. All decisions like this, bylaw amendments, additional bylaws, something as high profile like a safe lot program, all of that would come through council, which is a very transparent process, of course. So that's how the public would be aware, is through the council public meeting process. Additionally, we'll have some public engagement, certainly some consultation with community groups to get a sense of what the issues are and where the opportunities are. So we do it in a good way. In terms of the outcomes, we want to make sure that we're not having unintended consequences and that we're having the right effects. And so we'll be monitoring. We haven't designed the outcome system yet, but we'll certainly be monitoring things like number of camping complaints, number of critical incidences, number of unsightly campsites left behind after people have been, those kinds of things. We'll want to make sure that those are all going in the right direction. Like I said, we haven't fully articulated that, but that will be part of the evaluation. That will be reported back through to council.
Thank you. Can I sneak in one more thing?
Yeah.
1 minute. We understand that the impetus for the legislation were complaints, official, unofficial complaints, bylaw complaints. So we sought, through a Freedom of Information request, we sought to get these complaints over the last couple of years. They were due on July 10th. We had to file a fee waiver application because Thomasina didn't have the money to pay for the Freedom of Information request. So that added another 4 days. We should have had the information today for this meeting, and we still haven't been provided it, if I have my dates correct.
So council doesn't deal with FOIs, and so that's, we're not allowed to know who actually requests them. So any of that information is supposed to be...
It went up today. It actually went up this morning.
My point was,
today was the due date.
We came to the meeting without the information we needed.
It went out this morning from staff.
That was
Can I just add one point of clarification to that as well? That the impetus for this, as we've been saying all along, partly was bylaw complaints, but there were other issues as well that didn't come through a bylaw complaint process, so wouldn't necessarily be reflected in the results that you've got. So things like wildfire risk, water contamination, cleanup from district staff of contaminated sites, those kinds of things wouldn't necessarily be reflected. So that'll be a piece of the picture, but not the whole picture. Thank you.
Thanks for your questions, Mr. Chris. Councillor staff announcements. I went to the celebration of life for Don Evans on the weekend before last. It was just a wonderful celebration of a great man who contributed a lot to our community, and he was actually scheduled to present to council when he got back from his trip, so I'm sad that he didn't have the opportunity to do that. And I did speak with members of the board of the West Coast Railway Association and said that we would welcome an update whenever they feel ready to present one to council. And yeah, just wonderful to see our community turn out to support the family and remember someone who contributed so much, and he will be missed. Lots going on in Squamish. No shortage of events going on. Downwind, the Beer Festival, upcoming is the Wind Festival. So encourage our community to get out and experience all those things. Anything else from council members? It's late. Okay. Motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Council, we still have some meetings to finish that.